And we're live. Good evening, everybody. I'm live tonight with Tollah, or Ayatollah, a British English nationalist, I suppose. And I've wanted to speak to him kind of for a while now, since the riots began in Britain after the stabbings in Southport. So what I wanted to do since this all began was speak to an English person who knows what's up. It's a tough combination. I could only think of, the likes of Mark Collett and Laura Taylor. I could think of a handful of people. Tollah is one of them. Tollah's because we've streamed together as well for years, on and off. We've sort of crossed paths a lot of times. He was number one on my list to talk to. So these things are hard to judge from afar, and there's a lot I want to ask about the local context in England. It's not China. Obviously, it's similar enough, but it's just different enough that it's hard for me to really gauge it from afar. I'm just another American looking in, really. So anyway, thanks for joining me tonight, Tollah.
No, I'm glad to be on, mate. Thanks for having me. I was glad to be asked.
Oh, cool. Okay, so basically we have, I think it was 29th of July, the Southport stabbings. 3 kids were stabbed at a Taylor Swift dance competition. Most people know the story with that. Things happened, let's say, in the aftermath of that. And now we are 2 weeks later, and there's draconian totalitarianism happening in England right now under Keir Starmer. It doesn't matter. It's the state is putting this on people. We'll talk about that in a while. But what I want to go back to is start the clock after the stabbings. What actually transpired to get from A to B over those 2 weeks?
Right. Well, the first thing is, obviously, just for context on this. So Southport town, just up the coast from Liverpool. It's about sort of 35, 40 minutes up the coast from Liverpool. It counts as Merseyside. It's not Liverpool, but it's a bit of it's not an overspill town for Liverpool as such, but it's not Scouse exactly, but it's not far away. There was a 17-year-old Rwandan who'd been born in Cardiff to his parents who were from Rwanda, and I think he'd moved to the area when he was about 6, and he was from a village called his name's Axel. I can't pronounce his. I can't remember his surname off the top of my head. It was Axel something or other. Well, he supposedly very much an introvert, barely left the house. There's probably a lot we're not hearing. There was speculative stuff suggesting that he'd kind of talked about the need to, well, there are words I probably shouldn't use on YouTube, but with regard to white people, a word beginning with G. End of it sounds a bit like pesticide, but that's entirely speculative. Maybe I'm going to put myself in jail for having said that based on the precedent we're seeing at the moment in Britain over the past week or so as the regime have responded to this. But he went on a stabbing spree, as you say. It was like some kind of holiday club for the summer holidays. Obviously, summer holidays run from late July to the beginning of September. Went on a stabbing spree at this. It was a Taylor Swift dance workshop, and 3 young girls, aged 6, 7, and 9, I think, lost their lives. I think there were about 9 other girls very seriously injured, 2 adults injured as well. And rumors started going around, and the first rumor was that the name of the suspect was Ali al-Shakati, which obviously is an Arabic sounding and thus Muslim sounding name. That went around very quickly. There was some speculation from some quarters that may have been deliberate misinformation by the powers that be, with a view to sowing tensions between Britons and Muslims, particularly with regards to the larger geopolitical picture, with tensions rising between Israel and Iran and Israel and the region in general, and the prospect, if you believe what Israel is saying, since about the year 2000, the Israelis have been a week away from having a massive nuclear arsenal. But anyway, without getting too deep into that, there's a perception within, nationalist circles, I suppose, isn't there, that the Judeo-occupied West, if I can say that on YouTube, anticipates near-peer conflict, and to have domestic support for that, and maybe enough people joining the military to sustain that, they need kind of hostilities between natives and Muslims. That's one theory. I mean, just for further context on this, because obviously Keir Starmer's been talked about a lot. You've got the two-tier Keir thing now, Stasi Starmer and all of that. Keir Starmer's the Prime Minister now. He's leader of the Labour Party. He was elected in a landslide on the 4th of July. Now, that's been described as a loveless landslide because I think it was the second lowest general election turnout in Britain since the 1800s, I believe. I think it was about a 59% turnout, which was only just higher than the very low turnout in 2001 when there'd been foot and mouth disease, an outbreak of foot and mouth disease, which had caused the election to be delayed by about 5 weeks or something. But anyway, Starmer and Labour only got about a third of the vote. It was described as a loveless landslide, but because of the vagaries of the vagaries of the UK's first past the post system, that meant they got like a massive majority in Parliament. The Tories got hit hard after 14 years of government in which pretty much all people were increasingly disillusioned with them. Context on that's relevant because a lot of us within nationalist circles in the run-up to it were speculating as to what might the idea be here if they want to maneuver Starmer in with the big majority. Is it to kind of have a government that has a sort of a veneer of, a kind of a facade of legitimacy for things that they may anticipate go on over the next 2 or 3 electoral terms on the global stage? And we don't know. One of the things that perhaps gives the lie to the fact that there was a bigger strategy at work of trying to kind of throw the odd bone to the white population to keep them engaged so that some of their sons will still go and fight and won't have the attitude of, well, this country gives me nothing and hates me, so I won't join up, is basically what we're going to talk about, which is how hard they've come down upon the native descent because of all of this. The Ali al-Shakati thing always looked a bit dubious. I don't know whether specifically in relation to that or other things, there are people being, arrested and charged now over this, sort of spreading misinformation. There's lots of very disturbing things going on in the kind of the criminal justice system, so-called, in Britain as of the past sort of 4 or 5 days, really. But there was a vigil in Southport the following night. So that would have been Tuesday, I forget the date. I think it would have been Tuesday the 30th, perhaps. Now, during the course of that vigil, a man was arrested nearby, apparently with a knife, and word got around of that, and then unrest unfolded. Now, the first suggestion was that this man was a Muslim or looked like a Muslim. I gather, if this is reliable information, that he'd actually got an English name. But anyway, that riot, no, not quite riot, that vigil was basically preceded unrest, and the police got attacked and things got set on fire and that in Southport. And we can talk a little bit, I suppose, as we go on about I'm just doing the timeline for now, but the whole controlled spontaneity phenomenon, because I think there have been some interesting examples of how that operates and how much the state curate and astroturf all the responses to this that we see, but also aspects of it which in this context possibly didn't work or were deemed not to be able to be counted on to work. The following night was relatively... No, the following night wasn't relatively quiet. Wednesday, the 20... whatever it would have been, I think the 30th would have... 30th, 31st? Yeah, I think it would have been the 31st. Yeah,
it would have been the following night.
Wednesday the 31st. This is where it got somewhat interesting because there was unrest in other towns, targeted in a lot of cases at things. Like one thing that did happen in Southport was there was some degree of vandalism directed at a mosque there. I don't know whether that's the only mosque in Southport, but a mosque in Southport was vandalized and so on. There was probably a bit of the old controlled spontaneity at work the following day when, like, local tradesmen and that, obviously English, have turned up to come together with our kind of members of the Muslim community, our fellow members of the community to, sorry, go on.
No. I mean, I don't know how bad the delay is, but hopefully it's doing okay. But I mean, there's a lot going on there. So much I want to ask you. I think I'll come back to some of it. So I'm going to come back to controlled spontaneity. I'll come back to the idea that there's a geopolitical thing with Israel and Iran and all that. But let's say for now, because I'm interested in that stuff myself too. But for now, sort of, well, you can describe it whatever way you want. But let's say in a sort of at face value level, you had riots in Southport that first night with the police
the night after.
throwing and the night after throwing bricks and wheelie bins on fire and all that stuff. And then maybe like the big question I've wanted to ask just any English nationalist for like 2 weeks now, I've been dying to ask, is that it led to this totalitarian crackdown. It led to marauding gangs of Islamist Muslims responding to the alleged. So basically, all these things are supposed to be huge responses to the grave far right mass unrest, whatever you want to call it, right? Crystal knocked type of stuff or whatever, right? And my big curiosity has been like, well, I saw a few wheelie bins on fire. I saw some bricks getting chucked that first couple of nights in Southport and maybe in a smattering of other cities. But we're not talking cities being burnt to the ground. We're talking about nothing you wouldn't see after a football match, or like, or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it was massive. Maybe it was grand historical vandalism and violence that Britain or Europe has never seen before. But my impression is that like there's a big, huge gap between what the mobilized reaction, whether it's the Muslims on the street or the state in the sheets type of thing, is it actually reacting in any way in proportion to something that happened? Like,
no,
was there actually anything that much really in the first place?
No, I wouldn't say so. No, I wouldn't say so. It's just, I mean, if you're looking at this from a kind of a nationalist dissident perspective, it was somewhat interesting to see unrest among natives to that degree, because the natives are so thoroughly demoralized and pacified. Well, yeah, pacified, I suppose you could say, and just, passive in general and submissive, that was like, well, we've not really seen anything quite like this for a while. We didn't see this, for example. I think it's different because it's 3 young girls, but we didn't see this last June when Valdo Calacane, an African, went and killed 3 people in Nottingham. We didn't see riots like this after the Manchester Arena bombing in 2017 or the Borough Markets attack and that kind of thing. There were some protests, but there weren't riots in this way. But no, of course, the kind of the regime and its media apparatus have grossly exaggerated. Oh, they talked about pogroms and things like that, and there was actually misinformation from the regime side. Nick Lowell's head of Hope Not Hate. I mean, you talk a lot, Garrett, about the Institute for Strategic Dialogue. Hope Not Hate, or a similar sort of thing, a grass organization in this country that collect government money. Well, Nick Lowell's is the head of them. Reprehensible man. He shared misinformation alleging falsely that a Muslim woman had been attacked with acid in Middlesbrough. That wasn't true. So that kind of thing. But yeah, no, it was massively exaggerated. Yeah, but I mean, I don't know if you want to sort of follow up on any of that either.
Well, yeah, I like I do find the state is in a difficult position because they want to crack down basically, but they can't crack down on. The trouble is they don't want to do the Lee Kuan Yew approach, the Singapore approach of like just banning ethnic agitation across the board, keeping it reasonable, keeping it very fair, trying to hold this multicultural state together, stop it from falling apart, and keep it reasonably civilized. The problem is that they're not trying to do that. So what they end up doing is letting Black Lives Matter, do what they want, tear statues down, whip up inflammatory rhetoric, I mean, left, right, and center, shout and gesticulate at the police, I'm sure, quite a bit, maybe involving twerking and lots of other gestures, right? And the police literally kneeling. And I think Keir Starmer himself kneeling before them. Again, we've heard that, but it does make it hard for them to proceed. And I'm very impressed as well, by the way, with from looking across from Ireland, because after the first few days after the bricks were thrown and all that, and then the state came down with the iron fist, I thought, God, I wonder, are these like nationalists, like are the people on the street going to be sort of tough and wily and whatever, and are the nationalists going to be clever and like people like, to be honest, yourself and all the other people, anyone from you to Nigel Farage and everywhere in between, all different varieties of, levels of, I'm not trying to associate you with him, but you get what I mean. Like what are they going to come up with something rhetorically effective? And two-tier Keir is unbelievable because it's getting at all that.
Yeah.
It's putting a tether on between the what's the word? The contradictions. It's completely tethering the contradictions and sort of making them sink together or survive together. And there's no way the state can justify that now. So, but at the same time, they have to crack down. They can't let the riots or the solidarity among the whites and the Brits, they can't let it fester. So they have to crack down hard on it. But so it's beautiful in that sense. But and now you have Nick Laws. I said Lick Laws, which is kind of probably a good name for him. But But so now even the NGOs, like if you take the two-tier rhetoric to its conclusion, now Nick Lowell's and Hope Not Hate can't operate. The foreign or non-white, non-British ethnic groups can't agitate. They can't get angry at something. It's locked in now. It's baked in, and all the state can do the state is basically in a corner where it has to go full totalitarian or nothing in a way.
Yeah. I mean, that's a very good point you make. You know, they cannot. But so I've got a terrible lag at my end of hearing myself. I think that I don't know if that's. I can hear the lag of myself at your end. I'm not sure, but anyway, they cannot. Yeah, they cannot. But kind of, as you say, they're in between a rock and a hard place. And anything they do, that they're kind of going to end up perpetuating or proving true the accusation that there is two-tier enforcement and so-called justice. Two-tier care. I mean, we've kind of got a gift in that, you know, tier rhymes with care. I mean, that's another aspect of this that's interesting as well, is that, and it's one that shouldn't be overlooked for rhetorical purposes, despite the fact that it's not really the case. Now, Keir Starmer's a traitor, like they all are. He's picked for that very reason. That's why he's where he is. But it's like for years, you know, Sadiq Khan, the Muslim who's mayor of London, you know, people on the kind of kosher right, let's call them, have liked to say, oh, knife crime's up, this, that, the other. Sadiq Khan's London. It's like, well, he's just the latest in a long line of architects of this. He's only one very small part of it. You know, it probably owes more to the immigration under Tony Blair's government, because a lot of the young men coming of age and making London so much more violent were brought in under the Blair and Brown governments, and so on and so forth. But that you know, it's rhetorically sort of expedient to overlook that, because it's convenient, to be quite honest, from a point of view of rallying disillusion among white people and making them see the system and the regime for what it is, to say, well, there you go. You know, this is it now. This is what we've got. You know, it kind of, you have to be wary of the Tories you know, who've just been sort of ousted from power, have been incredibly quiet on this. They basically said nothing. Very, very interesting. But rhetorically, it gives you an opportunity to kind of say, well, yeah, this is what you're going to get now. This is the guy. And it kind of will sort of rally people against what is going on. However, the thing to be wary of over the longer period of time, particularly if this sort of thing happens again, is obviously the Tories taking advantage, because you just bounce from one side of the duopoly to another, and obviously neither of them are ever going to give you what you want. The thing to do is to use it as an opportunity to kind of try and educate people wherever possible that it's not a matter of the Westminster government as such. It's a regime, and the Tories would probably have handled it somewhat similarly. Where they may differ would be interesting. You know, it's an interesting thing to about this is actually how long it went on. I mean, I'll just say this quickly. Obviously, when you asked me to come on here, it was the beginning of the week, and I wasn't free until tonight. And I'd kind of said, well, don't think it will be going on by then, but I didn't think it would have been going on last week. Seeing this level of unrest and aggression among the native population was kind of unprecedented, really, because Keir Starmer, I think on what I was saying before is on the Wednesday evening, so the evening after the unrest in Southport, there was unrest elsewhere. Small scale protest outside a hotel housing these foreign men in Manchester. There was unrest in Hartlepool. There was unrest in a few different places. Others that I forget now. There were 3 or 4 places on that night. Starmer came out and condemned it the next day, but made no conciliatory noises about, okay, we acknowledge that immigration's too high and whatever else. Instantly, it was talk of, we're going to have more policing, more resources, more facial recognition, and all that. The fact that then in Sunderland the following night, on the Friday evening, there was probably the most amount of property damage and whatever else of all. Two police properties, not full scale police stations, but kind of like places where you'd go in to report things or whatever. They got set on fire. There was vandalism and things. And then over the weekend, there was kind of larger scale protests, and that's when you started to see the armed mobs of Muslims appearing and being begged by the police to leave their weapons in the mosque in Stoke-on-Trent and stuff like that, and things that ran on into this week. And then there's more we can say about all the controlled spontaneity stuff after the regime's response Wednesday and Thursday. But the two-tier thing, I mean, that is one win from this. I mean, they are proving it, which you worry about the chilling effect that would have, because of the sentencing we've seen for things like literally watching a riot unfold is quite frightening. But if they're being asked to answer the accusation of being of two-tier justice, that's a win, because it's getting the term out there and it's bringing it to more people's attention. What will be interesting is, do we see unrest like this again, and when, and how do the powers they're looking to bring in and the precedent they are setting at the moment with the processing people through the justice system fast and sentencing them very harshly, how does that affect things? But yeah, time will tell. I can't hear you, mate. I think your microphone might be off.
Yeah, it's one of those. My mic has got a mute button, and there's also a mute button on StreamYard. And sometimes you mute one, undo it, but it's not undone on the other. It's a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
Thanks. So what I was saying is that, like, with the political system that's so controlled, just so manipulated and sort of rigged, let's say, right? So is the media landscape, the like mainstream media, and even the online situation a little bit with, you know, you have freedom under Musk a bit, but you don't have Laura Tollah, you don't have Mark Collett. I don't think you're on either. It basically the mechanisms for what you might call democracy are a little bit rigged, and I think a lot of people know that. So that's why people go out on the street. That's why I feel it happens in Ireland, because people are just like, look, what are we going to do? Fianna Fáil to Fine Gael, and then we go to Sinn Féin. They're meant to be the radical outsider group, but then they're controlled as well. And then even when you get some new pop-up, like genuine nationalist, populist, anti-PC right-wing party in Ireland, kind of like a pop-up tent type of thing, appears out of nowhere and nobody recognizes the founders. And it's just bullshit, you know, it's fake. And you kind of think, well, they can do that ad nauseum. They can always set up a party just like the real opposition, but just almost like a photocopy. It's fake. And they're just, so it's just, to me, liberal democracy, especially in England with your voting system, is just so rigged and so fatal, hopeless. So I think one of the reasons in any country, I mean, especially over there, is going out on the street is a cathartic thing to do, or it's in a sense the only thing you can do, whether it's people being criminal or whether it's for the most part people just being activated, aggravated, shouting, marching, or it's the thing that, like, well, look, barring all of these complex systems, unfathomably complex systems of control around media, democracy, narrative control, controlled spontaneity, all that, one thing I can do is I can walk out my door, I can ring my buddies from up and down the street in town, and we can all meet up and just go march around. Or demonstrate. Unlike in Ireland, they've gone straight to the conclusion, whereas they've not pussyfooted around. They've been like, they pepper sprayed people and they've done all sorts of stuff in Ireland, but you know, they went straight to the conclusion in England, which is not just that if you attend one of these and you're caught throwing a brick, you're going to be arrested. You might say, fair enough, right? But it's like, if you're there, you're getting arrested, effectively. If you retweet one of these riots, even, like, we could go down the list, but even if you retweet one of them, it's kind of like if you look the wrong way, you know, all you have to do is just stay at home, say nothing about it, don't say anything online about it, don't like anything about it, don't retweet anything about it, stay out of it, and you'll be fine, right? And that's what it is. Stay out of it entirely, online, offline, street, talking to your neighbor, doesn't matter. Just stop, keep it inside your head, and move on and get on with your life, and you'll be fine to some extent, right? You won't be targeted by the Skynet. But if you do anything, you might be, and that's sort of basically drawing the rules of engagement now. So it's like, it really clarifies everything. It's like, you either just totally give up. It's very, like, it's an overused analogy, the Orwell thing and all that, but it is very much like the idea of, like, the camera pointed at you, and it can kind of see your eyes moving and what you're thinking or whatever. So you have to, if you're having bad thoughts, you have to be outside the camera. It's kind of like that. It's like, how far does it go? It's basically, it's not that you can't use these words. These words are racial slurs. You can't use them. You can't throw a brick at a protest. You can only peacefully protest. You can only do this. You go, okay, I'll paint inside the lines. I'll work with it. I'll play the game a little bit. They go, no, we're calling the bluff now, and we're saying it's not about the rules in specific. It's about what you believe and what you promote and what you support. So we're not going to draw a rule set. It's just basically, we'll decide on the day what it is. If we know it when we see it. So be careful. And just the problem is that just one more thing. I know you want to jump in, but
yes, okay, go ahead.
The problem is that makes it so that the problem won't go away. The dissatisfaction won't go away. The increasing poverty, all that won't go away. So you're left with a simmering pot with a big hard lid on top of it. I don't know where that goes. I don't know what you think. Obviously, phrase yourself, appropriately. I know you're under Kier's two-tier system here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, in the Stephen Lawrence Memorial Retail Park. Yeah, I mean, the first thing I thought of when you were describing there, well, we're making it very clear, it's not about the rules; it's about what we judge your intentions and your beliefs to be. He's not the only example of it at all. I mean, there are one or two others I could cite, but certainly the imprisonment of Sam Media from Patriotic Alternative. He was convicted. He was found guilty in the end of January this year, and then sentenced to 2 years in prison in March, basically for producing what were known as the 100-handers stickers, which bore slogans, funnily enough, warning of things like, ethnic conflict and, violence because of immigration, things like that. And he, basically, they tried to go after him initially under counter-terror law. I don't know whether he was convicted under that in the end or not, or whether the trial sort of proceeded under those terms. I forget the details. But the police basically had to admit that no crimes were motivated by the stickers, and the statements on the stickers were lawful. It's very clear that basically they were going after him for what they believed his opinions to be. And this is where they have very malleable, very legislation which is worded very carefully to be as malleable as possible, and basically to be entirely in service of those wielding it. So, we judge that it could, may or was likely to incite hatred. Well, that's you buggered then, isn't it? Because they can get you on that. We can say, well, that would kind of stir up racial hatred or whatever. So yeah, the legislation is written with that in mind, and Britain is absolutely terrible for it. But I mean, that's what you're talking about. That the more oppressive they become, the more the discontent will grow. I mean, yeah, this has been. I mean, the unfortunate thing we're up against here is the large majority of people. They've kind of got short memories. Their attention is easily diverted. I mean, that's one thing. Another is, and this is maybe a bit more interesting because there's the potential for this to backfire, is the powers that be perhaps feel they're in a situation where they've kind of got to go with a high risk, high reward strategy. Now, the high reward is if they set this precedent of, well, okay, you were within 500 feet of a riot, you're going to jail for 3 years. That they potentially set the precedent of it has a chilling effect, whereas people just don't do this stuff anymore. But the reward, the risk, of course, as I say, and maybe this is where they bank on people having short memories and being easily distracted. Is the risk is that you through wielding the stick so brutally, you create a lot more disillusionment, disenfranchisement, and just residual anger and resentment. I mean, I've talked about this kind of thing a bit. On my stream on Friday, I played a video of Keir Starmer, and he was asked a question by a reporter. This all began because of concerns over immigration. Have you got any intention to address those concerns? And he just kind of didn't say a word about it, and basically talked about, well, unrest is totally unacceptable, and we will do what we need to do to protect our communities. Now, something I found very interesting and very sinister is the use of the term communities. And sometimes, it's just protect communities by people like Keir Starmer and the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Mark Rowley. He said it in another clip that I showed on my stream on Friday, where he said, we will do what's necessary to, bring people to account and to protect communities, because it's a little bit like when you hear the term our democracy. When you or I hear that term, we hear something different. When you hear the term communities, now what that means, communities means they're protected groups. They're imported, non-native protected groups who are there basically to be weaponized as and where they see fit against the native population in one way or other. That I found very sinister and very insidious. And I think one of the best things you can do as a nationalist dissident is point these things out and explain them to the people around you, because generally speaking, a lot of the people around you, if not most, are going to have the same instincts about these things that you do, but they just don't have the knowledge you have. So one of the most important forms of activism you can engage in is sharing that. And the best time to do it is in the kind of time we've just had in Britain. So the same would be the case in Ireland, obviously. And I talked about it an awful lot when it happened in Ireland, the Parnell Square atrocity last year with the Algerian. Times, we're the people that want conditions in which none of this would even be possible. But as it is, we have to struggle against it. And one of the most important aspects of doing that is informing as many people around you as you can so that they see the world through different eyes with the information you give them. And one of the times where you can make the greatest inroads doing that is when the chickens have come home to roost. The chickens of the policies and agendas we oppose have come home to roost, and people have been hurt. People sadly have lost their lives. Appalling things have happened because of the agendas we oppose. Other people, the people that we would consider, let's say, normies, that they don't like that either. That is when you're going to have the most receptive audience, and when the things you tell them will have the most lasting impact. So, yeah, two-tier Keir and pointing out the, just how one-sided and anti-white the system is and has been is a very important thing to do. And they're giving us plenty of examples. And the other thing they're giving us plenty of examples of is how utterly terrified they are and how sort of submissive they are to certain foreign groups. Like, as I said, I talked about a video of a police, I think he's like, I don't know whether he was like a community support officer or a police officer, pleading with Muslims to leave their weapons in the mosque. So the implication there is like mosques are kind of just being used to stockpile for weapons, are they? I don't know. Maybe I can go to jail for speculating to that effect, but yeah.
Who knows? Yeah, it's that's crazy. There's like the idea that they would draconian fashion just arrest people, drag everyone up and throw them away, and it'd have a chilling effect. There's a lot to be said for like multiple thoughts here, but like some people say, oh, this is going to open a can of worms, it's going to radicalize everyone, and then the counter response is, well, don't be too optimistic. Actually, sometimes censorship works, sometimes the stick works, but then there's a counter to that, which is my view, which is like, yeah, you have to moderate your sort of cartoonish predictions there, but to me it's like, I don't know, some sort of a balloon animal or something. It's just a law of physics where, like, if you squeeze the air one way, it has to, unless it bursts, it has to go somewhere else. You can't squeeze it and make the thing smaller. It gets bigger elsewhere, and it contorts into these funny shapes, and you never know what way it's going to manifest, but it doesn't go away. I just believe that's a law of, like, I don't know, some Newtonian law or whatever, right? Where the energy can't like go and it can't just disappear, it goes into some other state. So there's that. Like, you don't know, it could be in years' time, right? For now, it shuts everyone up. The other thing is that what happens next time Muslims are pissed off about this or that? It could be Palestine, it could be black people, and some, like, I don't know, police officer shot someone and they didn't like it. You name it. But like, what happens then? Because it's like, well, wait, now we're looking at the two-tier thing from the other point of view. Like, we're not looking back at the BLM riots and how badly we were treated. We've been treated badly, and now we're watching this unfold. And now it's on the police to either throw all these people in jail for tweeting the wrong thing, these black people or Muslims, or if you don't, now it just becomes more flagrant. And it's like, there is only so much a population will take that. Something I wanted to ask you as well about is sort of like you say, people have short memories, but I feel like people's bellies have a big impact on their memory as well, right? And increasingly poverty is rising. England's been known for this. We see all these bald and bankrupt videos. Like, it's true in Ireland, it's true across Europe and the West for sure, but it seems to be especially pronounced in Britain. It's been pronounced for a long time. I know you've talked about Broken Britain. I loved that stuff you talked about before, these old films and stuff. Like, it sort of goes back in England a bit, the flats and this sort of broken down Rust Belt, the north, the former coal towns, and like the drab outside London places, usually up
life's
north.
Always been pretty shit.
I'm fascinated by that. I'm fascinated by that because it's not like in Ireland. Ireland is like a northwest European Qatar or something. Like, it is not the GDP miracle everybody says it is. It has got grim forms of sort of stagnancy and poverty and stuff for sure.
Yeah.
But I think it's probably worse in England than anywhere else in the like, besides like Moldova or whatever, in what we think of as the modern rich West. It's probably the worst. And I'm just interested to hear, what's the texture of life like outside, because I've only ever been to London, central London. So what's it like out there?
I mean, one thing I will just say before I do get onto that, just to pick up on what you were saying before about, is it, how oppressive the powers that be have been in response to this. And obviously you kind of went through the whole thing of, well, this will kind of sow resentment and it'll blow up in their faces, and other people counter and, well, people have got short memories and so on. There is a question to be asked as to whether, and I talked about Starmer just utterly ignoring the question of immigration when he was asked about it, and going on to, we're going to come down hard on these rioters and protect communities. You know, I mean, to be honest, you've not really got to be one of us to know what he means, to have a gut sense of what he means when he says community. So there's that. And with regard to the white population, the native population, there's a question to be asked as to whether it will prove to be a long-term mistake to go pure stick and no carrot, to not even make insignificant concessions to make it look like there's a bit of give and take. So, we'll stop the boats, we'll do this, that, the other. That does raise a question as to whether what we've seen is in some ways a panicked short-term response from a state which is a little bit tone deaf and a little bit out of touch with how a lot of people actually feel. And they're not very tactically astute, and that it could do more damage in the long run. We'll find out on that because, I mean, again, I think whether people like it or not, the prospect of if you're so much as looking in the direction of a riot, you could be doing jail time. Will probably work for them. But yeah, one thing I will say actually on the whole two-tier thing. We might talk a little bit about what happened on Wednesday night, but one thing I will say about that firstly, there's a Labour councillor from Dartford in South East London called Ricky Jones. I don't know if you heard about this. It's a man in his 50s. He's like mixed race, half black or something. He, in the middle of a large crowd of left-wing activists, said, this country's full of Nazi fascists and we need to slit their throats and get rid of them all. He's now remanded in custody until September. And now the charges he could be facing would be inciting murder. And you can get life imprisonment for that. So what happens with him will be very interesting. But I gather he is in custody. He's not been bailed. But anyway, that's just one thing. I wanted to mention that in case it kind of got forgotten. You could talk about how when they don't have a complete Potemkin village, but they can only kind of steer it a little bit, the problem they have is they have to rely upon people they've conditioned to be utterly rabid, who at times will let them down optically. So he would be an example of that. I'm just checking to see whether he's in custody. But to answer your question regarding the situation on the ground, there's a lot you could say about, and again, it's hard to know without having lived anywhere else how much different the rest of kind of Europe is. But I think there's always been a bit of a fecklessness and a callousness. Well, a feckless would be the wrong word, but certainly a callousness among the elite in Britain toward Britain still, and certainly has been quite class stratified. And, if you're going to be ethnic about that, you could go back as far as certainly maybe the Norman conquest, being ruled over by a small foreign elite and more clearly delineated classes and an aristocracy and so on and so forth. I mean, to this day, I think in England, if you've got a surname of Norman origins, you're likely to be slightly better off socioeconomically than if you've got an Anglo-Saxon name, nearly 1,000 years later. But, I mean, yeah, you talked about the Broken Britain series. Britain, biggest empire in world history, a country that's, for all its kind of wrongs in the eyes of many, has given a lot of innovation to the world, a lot of culture, X, Y, and Z. Life domestically, and part of this is it's quite a crowded country. Part of this is the weather is crap, but a lot of it is just, I think, again, a callous elite. The quality of life generally has been a bit crap for a lot of people. Not for everyone, but for large swathes of people. Working class life in this country is pretty rough. It's only actually, I mean, one example of this I'll give you from my own life. I can think of a couple of women I've kind of known and sort of got to know a little bit through, kind of dating apps and things. And kind of in my eyes, I had a pretty middle class upbringing, and like both of these girls that I kind of talked to a little bit that I can think of as examples, nice enough girls and stuff. They grew up with like drug addict parents, didn't know the dads and, all kinds of things. Yeah, my mum, she was on ketamine. I'd come home from school sometimes and she'd be in bed. And these are a couple of women that have gone on and done fairly well for themselves in life. And you just think, Jesus, just as some idea of kind of what it is like. I've never kind of lived on a sink estate or whatever. I've never lived in a block of flats. So not the best place to comment on that. But I would generally say, I mean, there's a lot about modern Britain. It's the most surveilled society in the world with CCTV and ANPR. It's very overcrowded. It's chronically overregulated. I nearly got a bus lane infringement ticket once, or I was about to, for the right front tire of my car hitting a white line of a bus lane in Birmingham. And I went back and said, that's ridiculous, but you'll be got for that kind of thing. I don't think that's unique in this country, but it's probably worse than most places. But I mean, that's not really what you were asking about. But yeah, I mean, life's awful. And I mean, the other reality of this is with immigration and demographics, we know that people think of the Muslim sexual enslavement and torture of schoolgirls. They think Rotherham. The reality of that is, generally speaking, wherever there are Pakistanis, there's been cases of this. It just happens. And it happens because, again, it goes back to a callous elite. But it takes a different form in the age of left-wing subversion because, of course, the permissible snobbery, it's the same old one, but in a new form. you know, with the addition of, it's the old snobbery of like sneer at the working class and just, have the upper class having very little in the way of noblesse oblige and sense of obligation toward them, the middle class sneering at them for fear of being mistaken from them or dropping back down into that class, but made doubly virulent by anti-racism. Oh, they're gammon, they're this, that, the other. So social services under left-wing leadership and, the police and the CPS allow these things to happen, and the police allow these things to happen, allow large numbers of young girls. And again, they're often from broken homes because of societal breakdown. Not always, but a lot of them, again, I say broken homes, the care system, they've only got one parent in the house if they are at home. And they can just be preyed upon with impunity by people that are an actual community. You may well be right that life in Britain for large swaths of people is a good deal more bleak than it is in a lot of Ireland. You've talked about Ireland's not this kind of Celtic tiger, sort of GDP miracle. A lot of the country's still relatively poor, but it's more rural. Even the kind of the provincial cities are they're kind of rural cities, I suppose, compared to Britain being very, very densely populated and very kind of post-industrial and so on. But anyway, go on.
Yeah, no, jump in. The population, I don't know what it is in England itself. You can, if 60 million, something like that. Or is it 40?
England itself is probably pushing 60 million. Britain is probably getting towards 70, yeah.
But 60 million, and it's like, just from my the proportion on the map, I don't think it's really that much bigger than the island of Ireland. Let's say, it's a bit bigger.
It's two or three times, maybe. I don't know. I could have a look.
You mean England itself?
Oh, if we're talking about England specifically, the area of England, right? Okay, so that is 130,000 kilometers squared. Ireland, for comparison, and this is just the Republic, 84,000.
Yeah, so it's not world,
not even twice.
Not worlds apart. So the population density is insanely different. Besides Netherlands, I don't think there's anywhere else in the Western world like that. And then really. It's sort of this very there is kind of the computer says no, the way the police come in with the clipboard and they say, we just want to talk about some of your tweets, and the softly little accent and that sort of they don't kick you in. Yeah, they don't kick it in. They're they sound like it is the computer says no sort of attitude, that kind of, it's like, wait, are you arresting me, throwing me in jail? And it's like, yeah, no,
managerial,
it's horribly managerial, and of course we have that too to an extent, but one of the things about class in England as well is you have what I know it's a derogatory term for white poor people, chav, right? But that type of idea, or white working class, or gammon, all that. To me, there's a bigger bifurcation between those and what we'll call middle class, the most normal of people, your average person. You know what I mean? Not someone who's not cartoonishly, quote, working class or cartoonishly rich with a top hat or whatever. Just majority of average-ish middle people. To me, the distinction between them and the working class in England is like a different species, like a different race. Whereas in Ireland, it's at the extremes, like lads on e-scooters and, going around with their hoods up and stuff. It is a bit extreme at that side. But for the most part, you could kind of have a toe in the estate world and be a bit of you could be an estate flats kind of person, and still there's not a world between you and the middle class at all. To be honest, culturally, you could be at the same thing, hang out. To me, when I see the estate people, there is more of a lumpen proletariat quality to the working class in Britain. I've seen Ed Dutton's documentary about the people who fled London, the old Cockneys and stuff. And a lot of the motor scooters and the disability and that kind of stuff. They maybe it's caricature I'm basing that on, but I think it is somewhat real that they are sort of completely almost deformed. Not deformed. You get what I mean, right? There's
I know exactly what you mean, mate. Yeah. It's not a caricature. It is like that. I mean, again, as I say, I've not seen loads of Ireland. I mean, the one thing that struck me, I was in Ireland when we briefly met, September 2022. One of the big things that struck me is you go through a town, not to make this about Ireland, but, and this won't surprise you, you go to a town like Navan, and demographically, it looks like a town of comparable size relative to the population in England. So demographically, Navan looked a lot like, say, Stafford, near where I'm from. Stafford, I think, is a much bigger town, but then, again, England's got a much bigger population. Talking about population density, the population density of England is about 5.7 times greater than it is in Ireland. There's a statistic for you.
Yeah.
That was very noticeable
different...
to me when I was over there. That was very noticeable to
Yeah.
me when I was over there once I got out of Dublin in terms of road traffic. But what you were saying, I mean, yeah, I mean, again, this is anecdotal, but like I was out in a pub in Stafford not long ago, and I mean, I went into a place and it's known to be somewhat rough, but like, again, people could say this sounds like you're sneering and being a snob, but it's more like just a shock at the way people's just general, as kind of a rough indicator of what people's quality of life must be. I was in a place where like 50% of the women in there look like they might be heroin addicts. Like, it just out in a pub. And like, that sounds, you know, some people would misinterpret that and say, God, you sound like a snob. And it's like, well, no, it's more like a case of I'm shocked that there are kind of that many people about who their lives aren't such a mess that they won't go out to a pub, you know, but it's clearly pretty bleak for a lot of people.
It's dystopian. Yeah. It's easily dystopian. Like if you saw that in China, if you went to a part of China and saw people like that, you would think, oh my God, what's going on here with these people? Like, this is a sad post-industrial world or something, some really depressed thing. And it's systematic, obviously. People don't become that way all by themselves. Like, these used to be proud working class people, you know, a lot of the northern towns, probably they had coal jobs and this and that. And they've kind of fallen like from grace. Like, even the working class is more degraded version of itself. But
yeah, well, much my thing is, I mean, industry and so you used to have mining towns, mining villages, and you know, and steel towns and so on, and that kind of thing. It's shipbuilding towns. A lot of that's gone. You know, there are fewer intact families and so on and so forth. Anyway, yeah.
And you used to have, like, you might have a working class family. This is in Ireland too, obviously. Like, you know, a working class family might be more like, they have the, you know, chips and beans and fish fingers or whatever, and the council house and the fence kind of half down in the front garden, maybe cans at the weekend, you know, that kind of stuff, right? And everybody, you know, all the mums get together on a couch outside in the front garden, you know, or whatever, and smoke cigarettes. Like, you still had that working class stuff, but they were kind of strong families. Your dad came home and, you know, he was a tough, like, you wouldn't walk through his neighborhood and look at him the wrong way, but also he was a real patriarch of his family, of his community. And you just don't have that now. Now it is more lumpen proletariat. But my thing is that I just can't, when I see like people out throwing bricks and getting, or just protesting angrily, it seems to be all that type to me. And then when I think of anyone who's even one or two notches above into like even lower middle class, I feel like they would totally hold their nose and they would just think, I can't be out with this totally different race of people here. So in a sense, the only people who are willing to go on the street and be spicy are sort of so detached from the rest of the society, the white society, that it's almost impossible to bridge that.
Yeah, I mean, there was a friend of mine who's kind of been around in nationalism a long time ago. We were in a kind of a Telegram group, and this was being discussed. And one of the points he made is, you've got these sentences, but a lot of the kind of people that were in the thick of this, to a lot of the people that were kind of in the thick of this disorder, like, you know, 3 years for throwing a brick, which will be 18 months if usual sentencing procedure is followed. That's like, well, okay, it's the latest one. They're in and out. You know, I always remember I kind of had a bit of a moment of realization as a kid. I'd have been, I don't know, 14 or 15, and I can remember just thinking about kids, kind of kids from, or rather, the areas of town where there were kids from my school going to, where, you know, it was just more deprived. And I'm thinking, like, well, why is it like someone from there is going to be like less afraid of, say, jail or whatever it might be? And it's like, well, there's less to lose in the first place, you know. And it becomes a pattern of life of like, well, you know, you haven't got a good job or a business that you lose because, you know, or maybe even a family that you lose, like an intact family that you lose because, you know, you do whatever, you get into a fight, you glass someone, or it's a drugs offense or whatever it might be, or like, oh, you get in a riot. You have less to lose essentially, but something
you're not
that people
concerned
probably
about
don't.
HR departments.
No,
you're
exactly.
Less concerned about HR departments and that. And
exactly.
Respectability, criminal records. It's kind of like that ship has kind of sailed a little bit. But
I was going to say one thing that I think, and we're seeing this in Ireland as well. But I mean, I think that informs the very specific tone of the kind of system loyalist liberal. I tend to call them mushrooms or vegetables in Britain. You know, the people you see on Twitter that are just, the screws got undone in their brain when Britain voted to leave the European Union and so on. That informs a great deal of their sneering. It's the class dynamics of Britain. Morgoth described it before as like a type of a low cunning, and like you see Americans, for example, American liberals, they are much more idealistic about their beliefs. They see it in much more idealistic kind of good and evil terms, and some people would speculate and kind of trace that to, the Puritan founding stock and, they're more religious and all of that. I think there's also legitimately a little bit more fear of the non-compliant white population in America because of they do control some areas, Bible Belt, they've got guns. Those people are just kicked and sneered at and recognized to be powerless and there to be just laughed at and ridiculed in Britain. Just to sort of draw a parallel with Ireland, I remember they had to kind of have the immigrant good news story, didn't they? So they got the Brazilian Deliveroo driver, Cow or whatever his name was, and somebody went and produced somebody thought they were being very, very clever and a really good boy or a really good girl doing like a cartoon of Anto from the flats, hands down his joggers, North Face, looking like, looking like a walking ASBO, as you'd call it in this country, an antisocial behavior order. And then you've got the heroic Brazilian Deliveroo rider and, you've got the contrast around them. And they slipped up a little bit because somebody like an Irish, kind of a sort of a more doctrinaire Irish leftist pointed out, yeah, that's class snobbery. Don't make it about that. They remembered some of the priors that they're meant to adhere to. They don't do an awful lot to actually, ensure that there are better pay or conditions for working people because that's antithetical to their religious dogmas about immigration and about non-white people. But I remember finding that very interesting at the time. Yeah,
that's another contradiction. Like to me, it's all about like putting the sort of a choke on the state everywhere you can, so where you find the left, like the left is half bought out NGOs, they don't care about the class stuff and all that. But there's another half that's sort of organic, millennial, Zoomer, whatever age, and they sort of think, well, yeah, I'm not racist, I'm against the far right, but I don't like talking about like chavs or whatever, like they're animals.
Yeah, they remember their veneer of Marxist priors, yeah.
So you kind of put that on with them, like, you actually speak to them in the leftist language from the right-wing nationalist perspective. You're like, so suddenly they're sort of listening to you getting seduced. And then there's the contradiction with the two-tier system and all. There's so many contradictions that can be played on that just like, tighten the choke a little bit to me and let the state do the rest of the business. But the other thing is like, I know this question answers itself, but the way, because there's such a divide between like the lumpen proletariat in Britain and the middle-ish class people, the trouble though is that what were previously middle class, so you can afford your house, your car, a holiday every year, nice orders on Amazon every week to, for retail therapy. And you can do, you're not rich, but like, you don't have to check your bank account every time you buy something or whatever. You know, from your wages and your means and stuff, you're like, I have enough. I can go for dinner. Once I don't go for dinner every 2 nights or whatever, I can go for dinner, every few nights when I'm free and I won't have to second guess it, whatever.
Not
I have
waiting
enough
for money to land in the account before you can actually buy anything.
Exactly. Yeah. You're not rich, but you're definitely ahead of the ball a little bit. Like, you're like, if my car breaks down, I can just go, if he quotes a big price for it, I'll just be like, oh, I'll just dip into that savings a bit more or whatever. It's fine. But again, you're not rich. You're just very middle class. And like, not even like middle class at best. And the trouble is now people like that over the course of 4 years in this kind of living nightmare went from having those pretensions about themselves, and then they didn't change anything. They didn't dox themselves or get fired or something through politics. They didn't work less. They didn't take less hours. They didn't do anything differently. And now they're sort of like trying to get cheap beans for home and going, I hope I don't get invited to dinner with some friends who still happen to have some money because I'm kind of awkward, can't afford it. Like, and then they're looking at their car thinking, shit, I hope that doesn't go. And so now they're sort of becoming the working class a little bit, or what they think of as the lower classes, the month-to-month people. And they're like, how am I going backwards? How am I literally going back? My income just basically shrank by like a third.
Yeah, that's been going on. That's been going a lot. Yeah, I will just say quickly, that's been going on a lot longer than the current sort of cost of living crisis and economic crisis and house pricing crisis. It's been going on a longer time. But anyway, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, no, I'm that's it basically. It's just I always love examples. It's like, someone who has a fence out the back, a wooden fence that they wanted to reseal, or do some job around the house, and they think, yeah, but I'd have to go out to the hardware shop and spend 100 quid or whatever, or before would have been like, oh, that'll be something to do, I'm going to go buy those stuff, bring it back. Now they start to think, actually, I'll just leave it. I'll just let that sit for you. Maybe I can't do it next year. I don't know. I'll just let it rot. I don't know what I'll do. I'm just going to keep surviving for now. And all these sort of extenuate or extenuous, I think that's the word, stuff can just sit and wait. And that's something that before the idle working class would be like, they had their dole, they had their basic living, and they couldn't sort of afford to do anything at all extra. So everything would just sort of rot around them while they're just going to sit around. And it's like, yeah, now you were middle class, you thought you were that, but you're not anymore. So I wonder, are they more prone? Is there a new several million worth of white people in Britain who are now willing to join the prole class, let's say, in their anger because of their conditions? Or that's because, to me, that's the big line. If that cracks, if another couple of million people say, do you know what? It's not just a total chav fest. I'm getting out there too, or I'm at least getting activated.
That's a good question. I mean, the thing I'm mindful of here is, first of all, what you're describing, that's as I say, that without getting into too much detail on it, because I'm probably not the best person to do it. There's been downward mobility. There's been a reduction in social mobility in Britain over a long period of time, and there's downward social mobility because a lot of people, they're increasingly kind of well educated, and they've sometimes spent a lot of money on university educations, and for what? Because pay isn't getting better. There aren't as many good jobs. What good jobs there are, it's not just, lower end jobs being taken by foreigners anymore. More of them are being taken by either immigrants or particularly people getting a leg up because of graduate schemes that are only for BAME people, for non-white people. There are more and more foreigners, and there are also, this is all whilst they get every advantage in terms of, civil service fast track diversity initiative to get good government jobs, any other government departments, you name it. They always favor white people. A lot of companies now, you hear stories of companies, they're just under instruction. Yeah, well, don't hire white men. There is the risk, I suppose, over the medium to longer term that they are creating a potentially very pissed off underclass with that. But will they carry their kind of manners and affectations down with them through media they consume and whatever else? I mean, the thing I thought of toward the end of what you were saying there is, don't know if you're aware of an American, what would you call him? Rob Henderson. And he's despite the name, he's actually Korean. He was adopted. He's Korean by blood. He's like an academic. He's the one that coined the concept of luxury beliefs, that in an age where no one really starves anymore, and most, it's the old archetype, isn't it? Anto from the flats you should have over there. He can wear North Face. He's got a Canada Goose jacket. He's he probably lives in squalor, but everyone can kind of have those outward signifiers of status. In that kind of age of mass-produced abundance, people that are kind of aspirational or their middle and upper class have started to signal their higher status through their beliefs, through their adherence to luxury beliefs, a lot of which we know to be bullshit. It's almost like an unconscious thing of, I'm so privileged, and I've done so well for myself, and my status is so high that I can afford to make a hobby of pretending to believe these things that just don't stack up. I live so far from the diversity, I can pretend to believe it's all just great. There's almost like a subconscious subtext of that to it. But he coined the idea of luxury beliefs. And the thing I thought is, I wonder about whether you're really going to see, people kind of moving down the socioeconomic scale and then sort of becoming a little bit less easily tamed, because do they want to let go of their delusions about what they are? Because, okay, they can't signal it by living in a nicer area anymore. Then maybe they went to university and they work in a call center, and they can just about afford to, rent a flat with a friend in a crap area where they get mugged by an immigrant or something.
But that's a nightmare, because if you, it's
well, I find it pathetic that so many of these people will continue to just remain cowed and timid and let's watch Mock the Week. I don't know if Mock the Week's fucking still on.
I know,
you get the idea.
Painful. That's so I don't know. I think of it, to me, it's like Anto from the flat stuff is, they're much better off at this point, because you have your flat, you have your medical, well, you have the NHS, is a different story, but you have your medical card, you have your sort of services are sort of laid on for you. And if you're very wealthy, if you're on several hundred grand a year, you're very wealthy, or capital owning and stuff like that, then you're probably actually benefiting, especially if you're capital owning, property owning and all that, everything's expanding. But for a lot of people, the worst position is the guy working in the call center renting, because it's he's making too much money that if you get a toothache, you've got barely enough money for noodles, right, to eat. Right. Whereas back in the day, it used to be that, you could get a cheapish car, take a holiday every year, even on your kind of pretty low level job. You could, go abroad for your holidays, go to Prague for a week with your girlfriend or whatever. And you could keep a car and you do all these kinds of things. Where it's now, it's nah, you just got to pay the rent and just go to work and just stare at the wall, really, and watch your Netflix subscription. That's it.
Yeah.
And so then if they go, oh well, now I've got a toothache, or I've got something going on. I don't know what the NHS is like, but for us, it's like
Terrible.
the list is so, yeah. So like we have it free as well, in a sense, whereas it's like you kind of, you can go in about your issue, but you're going to be 5 years waiting. So it's effectively a non-existent. So it's basically Mad Max in reality. The system isn't really there. So it's a question of, you better have, if you need an MRI, you better have 300 quid for it. You better have whatever it is for the dentist. It's basically, you have to pay. But of course, if you're like a middle class, or sorry, that person with a shittish job, earning too much to get any supports, you know, where are you going to get €600 for your dentist if you can barely afford like next month's rent? So
I mean,
that's
to give you, sorry, go ahead. I was going to say I've got a really good example when I get.
That's it.
Okay. Well, really good example for you of the quality of life for working people in Britain. A woman I know got a good job. She works for what would you call them? What would you call Amy? Let me have a look. They're like what is Amy? They're like a kind of they're an engineering company, right? So she works for Amy as a kind of a surveyor for what's called Amy Defence. They're like a big engineering company. So she's basically assessing properties that are being built on Ministry of Defence land for Amy. She's got a good job. She's single, divorced, early 30s. She's got a company van. So her job's relatively important. There's much more insight I could give you because loads of Afghans who generally claim to have been interpreters for the British, the ISAF forces during the war in and occupation of Afghanistan, despite the fact that a lot of them can't speak English, they're being moved in wholesale with their families onto Ministry of Defence housing estates that are housing, Army and Air Force and so on and so forth. With the whole families, their brothers' families are coming in. Then follow the reports that people's daughters are being sexually harassed by these gangs of men and worse. She's just bought a house. She's bought a house in a place that's near an RAF base, Royal Air Force. And she moves in and finds she's got Afghan neighbours. And one day she goes home and they're leaving rubbish in the garden all the time. They make noise all the time. She goes home one day and finds a kid of about 3 or 4 in her house. And he's drawn on the walls. So there's one insight for you. And in her line of work as well, she said these Afghans, I'll get onto the quality of life point in a minute, but it's worth painting you the whole picture. So in her quality of in her line of work, these Afghans live here for 3 years rent-free. They ask for and get everything when they want it. We want this done to the property. We want this. We also want that. She'll go to her boss and he'll say, I'm not fucking giving him that. And then when he sort of sanctions that decision, the Home Office will come to him and say, oh, yes, you are. You're giving them everything they ask for. So that's one thing. The other thing about this girl is, so she's got a good job. She's just finally bought her first house. She had to lend money from her mother to do it. She is now so poor. I think she's got 2 dogs and 2 or 3 cats. She's got £300 a month to live on after all the bills are paid. So that's groceries and everything else. She's had to take on a second job, which is a 0-hour contract working in the bar in an RAF camp. And they can only give her 2 shifts a week and she needs 3 to make ends meet. So that's that in so many ways. Being a single childless woman in your 30s, the Afghan neighbours, the reality of your work life, the struggle to make ends meet even with a good job, just to own a home. That paints such a bleak picture of life in Britain in 2024. There'll be similar stories to people from Ireland, but there's one from my side of the Irish Sea for you. Yeah, there you are.
It's brutal.
I was thinking about it earlier, and it's awful, but yeah.
Yeah, it is brutal, and the trouble with that stuff as well. You have that story, you've heard it, but there are hundreds of thousands, millions of stories like that you don't hear because people are generally proud. Like they'd barely even tell their sibling, their adult sibling. They'd be like, "Oh, I'm fine. I'm all good. They would,
and they don't want to confront the fact that that's their situation themselves either. It's pride. It's also not wanting to confront the fact that it's the situation they're in themselves either. Sorry, yeah.
No, yeah, it's like you are like. I do think people could get to a point where they're literally starving, as in like they're eating like little nuggets of like crumbs every day and actually starting to waste away. I do think people are, it's just probably a European sort of thing in general. That certainly it is here anyway, where you would actually probably starve, but before you would go to someone to say, "Listen, And that's the thing, is the self-acceptance. If someone's, if not everybody's like in this position necessarily, but if people said, you know, it's really hard, like this is actually really hard getting by with all this stuff, and it just doesn't feel right, and it's not like what I remembered, everybody would be much quicker to address it and to sort of fight back. And but people are so afraid that way. But you know, I can see people snapping over time. Like if this lady in the working in the bar in the RAF and the rest of it, that woman, like over time she could be radicalized, where maybe initially someone like that isn't aware of the politics, but then as the riots happen, they get sort of dragged into it by becoming aware of it because of the mass spectacle. So in one sense, it's like, is that a state psyop to, or some sort of 5D chess? But no matter what it is, it does make a spectacle of stuff that, like 6 years ago, you or I were on a stream and talking about it, and we're basically like weirdos. We're totally niche. You know, we're talking about relevant issues, but we're totally obscure to the mainstream stuff, right?
With a kind of holistic critique of the state of life. I mean, funny enough, one thing I didn't mention about that woman, without getting sort of into too much detail, I'll just say quickly, because you're talking about the NHS is the thing that reminded me, people, you know, with dental care and that. There was an amazing thing going back a few months in this country where there was massive queues for an NHS dentist, and all the people queuing were non-white. And of course, people wanted to look at this from an orthodox leftist point of view. And I say orthodox leftist, I mean orthodox leftists who are anti-white. They're like, boo, boo, with the Tories, the NHS. Like, yeah, notice anything about all the people queuing? Could that be anything to do with the way everything's oversubscribed? But anyway, this woman, yeah, she'd had 5 months ago, she had a referral for a fairly serious health problem. The problem's getting worse. They won't, until she's got a formal diagnosis, give her a better painkiller than codeine. And she's got to wait. She's got a 20-week wait for treatment after her first appointment to solve the problem she's got for fairly significant surgery. So, yeah, I mean, I can actually, my own father, he was looking at having a gastric sleeve, but he'd have to wait 2 years to have it done. He's 73, and he'd have to wait 2 years before it could be done. So no, the NHS is appalling. Yeah, there you go.
I have it myself. I had an issue recently. Like, I don't want to start. We don't want to all start talking about our, you know, stuff, sore elbows or whatever. But I have sort of like a leg thing. I don't know what it is. I'm fine in the most part. I can get around, but I can't run and stuff like that. Like there's something going on with it, right? And I've been struggling to find any person to do. I've gone to a GP. He thinks it's this. He sends me for an X-ray. The X-ray doesn't really show anything, so it's obviously something a bit more complicated. And that's where the system sort of bails out and says, all that more sophisticated stuff that you might diagnose your problem, like MRIs and more detailed attention or whatever, that's in luxury mode. So if you could have come in here, walked into an A&E, and you know, your leg was hanging off, and an X-ray could spot it, maybe we could treat you on the spot and you get away with it. Like if you just straight up broke your arm, standard, like arm break, clean break. But if it's something more complex, yet still fully within the limits of modern technology to be able to figure out, that's sort of rationed. It's so you get into Soviet weird territory where it's like, it's rationed, but they don't tell you it's rationed. They're like, oh, maybe you just need to go to a physio. And then you go to a physio and he says, oh yeah, you should stretch it out more and this kind of stuff. And we'll do 7 sessions, and then I'll send you back maybe for some more scans or whatever. And you start to think, okay, so this physio is just trying to rent seek from me. The doctor won't help me, even though I already paid him the initial fee, which is meant to give me access to the rest of the healthcare system. I get a sense of there's some weird rationing thing going on where they just don't want to. So anyway, I say to the guy, he's like, no, you definitely have a problem there. It's just that, you know, MRIs are sort of, he basically tells me, is like, they're rationed. So like, you know, all this stuff will be hard going. And I just say, okay, look, I'm not that flush, but you know, if it's my health or whatever, let's just pull the finger out here. Send me for the MRI, send me private, you know, or whatever. It's fine, whatever it costs. I'm just sick of it now. Just, you send me in. And he goes, cool. I say, how much is it? He said several €100 just for just to meet the guy, right? An orthopedic, whatever. And I go, okay, so this is like, you know, it's expensive, obviously, but yeah, send me for that guy. Cool, I'll refer you. And I say, how long is it going to be? And anyway, basically what happens is, like, I get my letter in the post like 6 or 7 weeks later for the appointment, which is another few weeks later. And I go, okay, so this is the deluxe mode. Like, this is where I pay the money out of pocket. Well, I've already paid it in taxes for the public one. Doesn't work. But I go for the private one now. And even that is so oversubscribed that it takes so long. It's like nothing really works at all, is kind of what I'm getting at, I suppose, even if you pay. Even if you want to send your kid to a school, you have to get in line for the school places to be rationed. I always tell people, like, that is not normal. Like, you don't get too used to that. It wasn't normal 10, 20 years ago in my life. anytime in my life to say that, like, if you wanted to go to a GP or sign up to a local GP, you just rang them up and said, hey, can I go on your books? I just moved in the area, whatever. They would just say, okay. Now it's like you have to show up on your hands and knees and make a case or something. It's bizarre, you know. Everything is rationed, even stuff that you pay for from pocket. So I just think people can be so reached, like when these riots kick off and everything, you know, you can be a reasonable voice just explaining it to people. That's, to me, that it's not about trying to get people to vote Tory or Labour or Reform. It's about getting into people's heads and making more people think like you do when the time is right. Because, like, again, like 6 years ago, you and I on some stream, or Morgoth, all these people, it was sort of like an insular conversation to alt-right and all this kind of culture war stuff. Now it's just like, the funny thing is, I always think is that if I'm doxed to, like, it's not even doxed because I'm who I am, but like someone I know in my normal life kind of connects the dots or whatever.
Yeah.
Which is weird because I never know who has or hasn't. But I used to sort of think that might be kind of strange. But now I'm like, if that happens, or anytime it does happen, I'm just like, 6 years ago, you could have accused me of being very fringe and kind of weird, niche, weird internet radical politics. But now I just go, hey, look at Coolock, look at Dublin, look at the 80% of people are against immigration and they want people out and on the polls. Like by any objective measure, I'm not only not an extremist criminal or whatever, I'm like the definition of normal. And it's like no joke to say I am a definitional centrist. So like, I don't know what the doxing and the fear is about. I'm the normal guy here, like, you know. So that's why you become that guy now by all this craziness, by the draconian response and by the riots. That puts yourself and Mark and Laura and all these people into the position now of the normal person.
Yeah, well, this is the thing is, you know, what you're talking about. Yeah, it is quite staggering that the rate, and Britain and Ireland have this in common, and so I think to an awful lot of Western countries, the rate at which the countries are being flooded with foreigners, with all of the consequences of that, and a lot of them, it's not just it's the crime and it's the, you know, the lack of safety for young women. It's also, as we said, it's like housing is a big one, but health service, so on. I told the story about the dentists, the NHS dentist before. The rate at which things are getting worse is so rapid that, yeah, it is becoming sort of more mainstream. But again, you still have a lot of work to do as one of us, because most people aren't that adept, as you say. Don't get too used to how bad this is. My way of putting that is I'm forever saying that normality bias is a very pernicious thing. People will kind of listen. People can get used to working with dead bodies. They can get used to working. They can get used to being beaten up for a living. People can get used to an awful lot, unfortunately. And there's certain things they shouldn't get too used to, because yeah, if you're born in the contemporary West, you are, in certain regards, some of this is arguably starting to change, I think it is, but you're kind of safer and you're better provided for and more looked after than 99.99999% of people in history, perhaps, in terms of your life expectancy and your calorie intake and God knows what else. But what you should also be judging, as you hear, what it should be judged against is what could life be like under a benevolent regime that wanted, you know, that put your interests first, that ruled in your interests. And by that, I don't mean, well, everyone's free to sit around and get morbidly obese all day and we all get universal basic income. I mean, not living in a country that's flooded with foreigners, not living in a country where the public services are just not fit for purpose, not living in a country which is like an anti-white anarcho-tyranny where the police barely even respond to a lot of crimes, but, you know, in Britain, for example, they will are 16 times more likely to come after you for something posted on the internet than they are in Russia. You know, what would it be like? And that's the benchmark against which you should judge it, because it's holding the powerful to account. Of course, that's a very difficult thing to do, because as we've talked about tonight, they're throwing people in jail left, right, and centre now for being, in some cases, practically in the wrong place at the wrong time. A guy in Middlesbrough, a 53-year-old bloke, got 26 months for, in the police's words, shouting and gesticulating at officers. So it's not an easy thing to do, but I mean, as I said, I've said this at great length over the past couple of weeks in the midst of all this unrest. You've got the power to kind of connect the dots for a lot of people. And again, as I say, as you were talking about, put it in its context. You know, like, you don't like the fact that where you live feels increasingly foreign, and you're kind of inured to the fact that it's bloody hard work to get seen for any medical problems, to actually get anywhere with it. You know, you want to get a doctor's appointment, you call up at 8 o'clock when the GP surgery opens and you're already 26th in the queue. And you might get an appointment, you might not. You might have to take the day off work to get to the appointment, whatever it might be. putting it all together for people say, because we have a holistic critique of the state of life under this order. And it's a powerful thing to have, and you need to spread it as far as possible. The good thing about that is, again, you're in with somebody. It can be anything. It could be economic. It could be about public services. It could be about demographics. Because, of course, the thing people are kind of inoculated against is, oh, I'm not racist, but I don't want to seem racist. But you can get there eventually once they're kind of more relaxed with you. But yeah, I mean, it really does make you think about how much worse things are getting and how rapidly it's happening. And yeah, it's like what you said earlier, the thing of people's bellies can kind of affect how long their memory is with this kind of stuff. People, when they're hungry or in pain, they're a little bit more liable to lash out.
Yeah, and maybe find solidarity like in a culture, and like, because let's say in the disintegrated culture of like normal white European people in their respective countries, or Americans or whatever, it was sort of torn apart, like the fabric of life and fabric of society, and it was replaced with material comfort, and even still we're more comfortable than a lot of people in history. But the trouble is that anyone over the age of, I don't know, 20 years old remembers the period before, maybe 5-6 years ago, because it was post-COVID is when the inflation and all that, the real like shit hit the fan. And people remembered like, more holidays and more comfort and stuff. And now things are getting a bit, wintry. The cold matters once again. Your teeth are a danger to you. These are very archetypical of like past forms of poverty, really, and like pre-modernity sort of stuff. And that's becoming more real for everybody. So again, that comfort is taken away. So it's like now, so it's like, okay, people 100 years ago were poor everywhere basically, but they had each other, they had their forms, they had their social fabric, their patriarchy or whatever it is, right? They're maybe not a patriarchy, they're sort of their hierarchies and ways of life and stuff. But now it's neither.
Community,
So yeah, community. It's that funny word, community. Actually, that's, you said they're talking about communities because that means Muslims and whoever else, right? It's such a weird, of all those doublespeak things, that's such a sad one, because community used to mean like you go to some parish or something, like a small area of like a village of, like, London was never a community, it was too big. But there would be a community within London, or there would be a community in a rural area where they have a football club, and it's sort of basically like a few hundred people and everybody sort of knows everyone. That defines the community, where it's like an entity in which everybody somewhat knows everyone, and there's bonds between everyone, even if they don't know each other personally. They're part of the same clubs and this and that. Whereas now it's like, what it means is that you're part of a racial group that isn't native to the land. Like, what a bastardization of the word, of the meaning of that word.
That is replacement in action, isn't it? Yeah, because it used to mean like, okay, there was the cricket club and there was the football team and there was a local pub, and that was the community, was kind of the people that all had that in common, and the church and whatever else. And now it's like, well, here's this foreign group that we've imported against your will, and that we're going to privilege over you. And so that is that is the truest example of the replacement. Yeah.
And even beyond the foreigner thing, it changes the definition of the most important definition of the word, which is community, communal, like the coming together, a communication of people, right? That makes us human. That's what we would think of as communities, people who have some tie to each other in some way, like personally. Whereas what they're saying is that if you're a Sikh in Kent or a Sikh in Liverpool, who will never meet each other in your entire lives, you are a member of the same community. It's sort of strange, isn't it? It's like beyond the fact that whites can't be part of this community terminology anyway, and that's the real galling aspect of it. But just beyond that, it's like a Sikh in Liverpool and a Sikh in Kent are part of the Sikh community. But it's like, well, they're like, we never thought of that. Like, nobody ever said the British community or the Irish community. Like, it was always reserved for us actually knowing the person, so that if you were sick, someone walks your dog. If you blah blah blah. It's like, so they've turned that into like a pure racial thing that's reserved for everybody but you. But I just think people will maybe want to seek something again, meaningful with the material deprivation. One thing I want to ask you about too is that when there was the pushback after the little sort of mini white riots, let's say, that happened, English riots across a few towns, and then we saw way more counter marches of foreign communities.
Yeah.
Was that just like Muslims, or was it broader POCs or whatever? What's
I mean,
the
it seemed mostly to be Muslims. I mean, I've heard accounts of, like, you know, in places like Sheffield, I think in Plymouth as well, there were cases where kind of football lads, and a lot of them, some of the older ones, were being set upon by kind of, you know, blacks and Muslims and Antifa allying, you know, in typically kind of left-wing cities like Bristol, you had kind of Antifa violence and stuff. But I mean, the main thing that stood out is Stoke-on-Trent as one place, which probably doesn't jump out to most people as like a particularly diversified place, but it is a lot of Pakistanis there. The Saturday, a week ago yesterday, there were, you know, thousands of them going around with, you know, machetes, samurai swords, baseball bats, and so on. And again, it was in Stoke-on-Trent, where there was some police officers squirming and pleading with them, saying, like, we don't want you to think we're against you. Please just leave your weapons in the mosque and all of that. And we've even seen videos. I mean, incredibly, like, this is really farcical stuff. Videos of police officers sort of saying, you know, assalamu alaikum, you know, we don't do two-tier policing, you know, and so on. They're literally beginning it with assalamu alaikum. We want to reject all allegations of two-tier policing. We don't do two-tier policing. Alaikum assalam or whatever. Literally, I'm not joking. I'll share these on my Telegram account, and it kind of think, God, are some of these police in on the joke or what? But anyway, so there was that. I mean, the thing that was really interesting. Oh, I know you were playing. Yeah, I don't think I've seen the video, but I've read about the chant. Yeah, like, oh God, these awful bloody people. But I mean, yeah, did you want to play that? I can't hear you. I don't know if you're muted.
Yeah, I don't want to stream. Sorry, I didn't mean to have it to cut across you. I don't want to stream content necessarily, but just this one, we'll let this one run.
Yeah.
How about that?
Okay.
Just, you haven't seen this before fully, no?
No.
Okay, because here's the bastard, like these Muslims who are obviously, like, we'll say homophobic or sexist or whatever, generally. Basically the contradiction is pretty funny. I like, she's saying we're gay and stuff, and you can just, like, people are like uncomfortable with it.
We are black, white Muslims, and we're Jews, and we're gay. We are black.
Okay, that'll do. We are black, white Muslims, and we're Jews, and we're gay. Again, Muslims and Jews at the moment not getting on famously well, but
no.
Yeah, but once they're against the English white man or whatever, nothing is
more of an abomination, and nothing is more of an affront to nature than the white liberal under this regime. It's that simple. They're the most denatured, incomprehensible people of all. And you have to wonder how in their gut do the non-whites, who are the recipients of these people's kind of condescension and constant carte blanche for everything, how do they actually perceive them? I think they must see them, okay, they're useful to us, but they're utterly revolting. And what's revolting about them to them is just how far removed from anything they know of being normal, which is to say taking your own side, being part of a community, and so on and so forth. These people are absolutely abominable. I don't know if you have anything to add on that.
I mean, yeah, they are what they are. I just don't think many. I think most like active white liberals, we'll say, like real active ones, this deluded like 19-year-old girls or whatever, I don't know, but the vocal ones, most of them are paid, you know. I've often thought the only way you could get let's say the only time because for all the talk about community, the only time you're going to get Muslims, Jews, gays, blacks, travelers, whatever, in a room together is if they're all paid by the state to be there. Representatives of their groups kind of liaising via the state for some sort of power arrangement, so top down. Otherwise, why on earth would a traveler and a black person and a Jew and a gay be in a room, like in normal life, outside of some state junket? Like if you saw that in real life, like you go to a barbecue somewhere in like a secondary town somewhere, and you walk in and you think, what kind of government event is this? They say, oh no, it's not a government event, we're just all friends, like, you know.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right in that. But of course, the other thing that will bring together, other than their transport being put on and paid for and everything else, is, again, under this order, it's basically to unite against white people and white interests. Because that's what they mean when they say their communities. There's a gay community, there's a Jewish community, there's a black community, a Muslim community. You know, they could all be brought. Yeah, they can all be brought together, basically, just out of enmity toward white people.
Yeah, I wonder though, like, they can.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying they aren't busting in there to do that and everything. Of course they are. Yeah, but like, it's all for that purpose. Anyway, yeah, go on. Sorry.
Yeah, I just believe, maybe with the exception of the Muslims, I don't know, they seem to have a little pep in their step, let's say. You know, in terms of actually out there in real life, like getting activated, I just think without state mobilization, you know, like even the Black Lives Matters and all this in the US, like these big, huge riots. I think if the state just wanted to turn a dial and just make that stop, they probably could. You know, I
Well,
like
it's
if they wanted
arguable
to
that they
just.
have at different times because Black Lives Matter was there in 2016. Then you heard very little from it between 2017 and in May 2020. Then it was back.
Yeah, they could like these like, you know, or the like even the gay thing, LGBT, like that's kind of faded off. Like you notice, like I was going to do a video at some point about 2024 and say the day or the year that Pride died. You know, that it in our lifetimes, like you're up somewhere vaguely close in age to me, maybe, same overall era, maybe,
I'm
but
39, so it's a few years, but yeah.
yeah. So like, you know, we remember a time before this crazy pride stuff. You know, there's like I don't know what year it was. Was it 2008 or before that 2005? But there was a time when suddenly the rainbow flag popped into existence. Pride marches became a thing. Before that, I'd never heard of a pride march, and now it was just the dominant culture. The rainbow, it was sort of the overarching thing for this whole bio-Leninist, whatever it is, anti-white, anti-normal coalition. And for some reason it faded. 2024, it's just like there's pride fatigue. People are over it. They've stopped pushing it so much. I think the state can just do that. Like if the state wanted to go down the sort of Putin road and make it sort of, you know, taboo again and dial it up, I think they could do that. You know, so to me, I always look at it as state first, regime first. Like I certainly believe that in the top office, hypothetically speaking, if they said, do you know what, the gay stuff is too much, we're going to actually allow more critique and sort of defund all of these groups basically, and maybe fund and promote and voice boost the critics who are many for obvious reasons, because the criticism is valid, and just adjust the playing field overnight.
Yeah, I mean, they could do that very easily, because the first thing they would do is they would basically be giving permission to loads of people that think, well, at best, they think, I'm not that bothered about these people, but this is all a bit much. Let alone people that have got basically more deep-rooted critiques of the way this is all promoted and everything else, and maybe religious opposition to it and so on. So, yeah, they would. You know, they have to pour, as we know, enormous resources into everything from non-state media propaganda to speech suppression legislation to kind of create and then maintain these conditions. And it involves a lot of keeping lids on a lot of feelings. You know, they try where they can to manufacture consent for this stuff and to kind of to remold people's minds, but there's always going to be a contingent of people with whom they can't do that. And for those people, they have to. It's like the racism thing. It's like I said, you know, we talk about how oppressive the laws against stirring up racial hatred are in Britain and whatever. Yeah, they are. But that's for people that can no longer be deterred or aren't deterred in a moment of real anger by the fact that they'll get called racist. The fact that there's this kind of artificially imposed social taboo against, I don't want to be called racist, against, you know, being seen as saying something racist or whatever, that does an awful lot more work to control what people say in everyday life, and even what they'll allow themselves to think about and contemplate, than the threat of going to jail does. Because some people aren't even, you know, some people who are quote unquote racist aren't even aware that those laws are there. So they do an awful lot more through kind of soft power and whatever else. But yeah, sorry.
No, it's, and even the racist, like you know, you see people talk about that, like everybody's so afraid of being called racist, so afraid of being, the word they always use is branded. They don't want to be branded, as if it's a sort of a like a manners thing. Like, I don't want to be seen as uncouth or something like that. And to me, I don't know, that doesn't cover it at all. It's like no, what they want is to be able to access jobs and clubs and stuff like that. They want to be able to, like, they literally don't want to be blacklisted out of society itself, like at all levels. So like, if you took all that away, if overnight regime just waved its magic wand and said, you can have whatever job you want, we'll actually put in a law to protect political views, and it's low-key, it's the racism thing, it's basically rooting that aspect out and making it so that actually calling someone racist is a form of racial hate speech and stuff like that. We're going to do it that way, right? Suddenly you'd find middle-class people would be like, I don't I don't really care if I get called racist actually anymore, to be honest. It doesn't bother me at some instinctual moral level. It's just like the axe over your head. But so you know, they could adjust it, and they could like demonize Muslims and that too, but you know, for like arresting Ricky Jones, and like they could spread that out and sort of say, actually, we are going to start cracking down equally. We're going to start kind of cracking down on the racial politicking from the other side too, which I think would be a very interesting and probably unfortunate scenario. Like, how would you feel about that if they became
I understand what
Singapore?
You're saying. I mean, it's funny because I've seen one or two examples of Muslims getting somewhat kind of harsh sentences, but I've seen more examples of white people doing it. They've got more to be afraid of from Muslims as a community for getting accused of, prejudice, Islamophobia. I mean, Labour, for example, are already talking about bringing through a new definition of, quote, Islamophobia, end quote. And I mean, this has made me think of something Morgoth said in the run-up to the anticipated victory of Starmer's Labour Party in the general election, which is they've had a very difficult year with Muslims because obviously you had the Hamas attack on Israel at the beginning of last October. Israel instantly embarked upon its kind of very bloody campaign against Gaza. And Muslims in Britain were very unhappy that the Labour Party, which is led by Keir Starmer, who kind of, he's married to a Jewish woman. They've got two Jewish daughters raised in the Jewish faith. Starmer, I think, at least superficially, actually participates in some aspects of Judaism on that basis because he's married into it. That, together with ultimately the party's basically more or less their support for what was going on, made a lot of Muslims kind of say, well, we're not going to vote for Labour anymore. And people have been talking for a while. They've been forecasting, and it may happen eventually, for the day when Muslims form their own political party. I mean, a lot of independent candidates won in the last election, you know, just Muslims standing in Muslim areas because they left the Labour Party and stuff like that, places like Leicester. So Morgoth had speculated, well, the problem they've got, Labour, is they're still going to need Muslim votes. The Muslim population is not getting any smaller, but they are between a rock and a hard place because they can't just say, like we think the state of Israel is illegitimate and X, Y, and Z. They can't do that because where's their money coming from? Who do they ultimately serve? Well, we know. What can they do? You know, the old faithful. They can basically go after Islamophobia and after white people that aren't too thrilled about having loads of Muslims in the country. They can go after them harder and give Muslims more carte blanche to do that as a bit of a sop to keep them on side with Labour. So there may be an element of that at work as well.
That's interesting.
I don't know.
That's an interesting idea because it's so complex. I was actually I don't want to get into this now, like absolutely not. But just as a brief aside, I was talking to someone recently about the stuff up north in Ireland, you know, the loyalists and the nationalists and anti-immigration stuff, and like I was trying to describe to someone recently how complex that is, because it's all the complexity you have going on in Britain now mapped onto the Troubles sort of conflict. So it's like layered ethnic stuff, then with the state coming in and funding it from both sides, and then the Irish side, like down south here, and the British side. It's like if you want to, if from like a purely political science point of view, if you were doing nationalist political science and you tried to explain from a nationalist anti-immigration point of view how the chips lay up there, it's like 7 layers of confusion. It's tough going. But back to Britain, you have nationalists who are anti-Israel, anti-Zionism, and the Gaza genocide, and you have Muslims who are the same, obviously, lots of them. But then you also have the state who can play it the other way and say, well, no, we're going to distract the Muslims with or like, you know, give them some red meat with the whites. We're going to oppress the whites for you, like who offend you at a visceral level, and throw you that.
We're going to distract them from one genocide that we're supporting by giving them a bigger part in the genocide that we're imposing on the people here.
Unreal. But it's quite complex, you know. It's quite like it's not so simple in a way, like the stuff that's going on. And usually, you know, you think, oh, there's Muslims here, there's Sikhs here, they're fighting, that's it, you know, or something. But this is there's so much manipulation goes on that this is crazy, and the link between global geopolitics and national level stuff. that's what I find mad, which is let's say the establishment in the West will try to say that your opposition to hundreds of men being brought into your community, little girl gets attacked, whatever, stuff like that happening, stuff that is universally objectionable. Any common sense, Chinaman looking at this from afar could look at it and go, that's crazy, right? Any people, white, black, or anything, would naturally say, I don't want that. Like a Ugandan having so many Russians brought in would be like, what the hell is going on here, right?
Why?
Yeah, well, like, why is this happening? You know, who are these people? Like, why do they get houses and we don't? And, you know, it's just totally natural. And you're told that opposition is like the gravest sin of world history. Basically, you're the most evil type of race of any type of person that could exist, just for that sentiment. And yet they're dropping bombs galore on children, slaughtering children, sniper targeting children, and that sort of, the establishment considers that there's a little bit of difficulty going on in the Middle East, you know, and we need everybody to exercise restraint, but overall, everybody's got a right to defend themselves and stuff. It's crazy.
Well, I mean, you went on you asked me earlier, and it kind of ended up going on a long time. You asked me for a timeline of events. Well, here's a really concise one, as the regime would have it, although there are certain parts of this they'd kind of rather mumble through, which is that, you know, what we're talking about began when 3 little girls were murdered by a crazed African. Muslim paramilitaries went on the rampage, while the police, who viciously attacked white protesters, groveled to those Muslim paramilitaries and gave them carte blanche. And the white people who are unhappy about the immigration that led to all of this, they're the sinister enemy that we all need to rally against to defend our security, our freedom, and our multicultural society. That was basically that was the stage-managed conclusion the state maneuvered this toward, when you know, from somewhere we had these reports that there were going to be 30 or even 100 white protests essentially on Wednesday evening. They never really happened, but you got a load of counter-protests and a big photo opportunity, and all of the major newspapers, would you believe it, had the same front-page photo, which is supposedly some kind of, Brits gather together to face, gather out, Brits come together to face down, the thugs. And they got their line, which probably came from, MI5 and government contracted agencies that are there to kind of, spin everything and to cultivate the public response. There's a lot I could say about the whole controlled spontaneity spectacle and the way that the regime managed this from a propaganda point of view, and the ways it sadly worked, the ways it didn't, and ways that maybe the regime foresaw that it couldn't work because the public mood was a little bit too hot for it. But there you are. It's quite remarkable. Yeah.
Tell me what controlled spontaneity is? I don't know.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So it begins with a recommendation to do a bit of reading to anyone that's not familiar with this. There's a kind of a sort of a somewhat anti-Israel, anti-Zionist kind of pro-Muslim media platform called Middle East Eye. But there's a journalist called Ian Cobain did some excellent work for them going back to, this was May 2019, and it was titled Controlled Spontaneity, the secret UK government blueprints shaping post-terror planning. After the 27 London Bridge attack, local officials were told, we're sending you 100 imams. So it means that a lot of this, the old thing sort of in the middle of the last decade that was the big thing of, Muslim terrorist kills a load of people in Brussels or Paris or Dusseldorf. There's then some idiot there in the street with a piano playing Imagine by John Lennon and people drawing like chalk hearts on the ground. This was basically an investigation into how all of that in Britain was completely fake and managed from the top down. And it documented it with actual examples. I'll put the link in the private chat for you in case you want to share it in the YouTube chat, because it's, I would say it's essential reading to understand how the powers that be manage these things. It just really kind of, it will confirm a lot of what you suspect. And the reason I think this is interesting is, and I did a post about this earlier in the week. As I said, there was a vigil on Tuesday evening in Southport after the Tuesday, so the day after the atrocity with the Rwandan murdering 3 young girls and trying to murder many more. In those circumstances, based on form from the government and the state, would have expected a larger scale, more heavily televised, more stage-managed vigil, maybe involving the mother or the father or a relative of some of the victims, to go out and make the right noises. This is terrible, but we all love Southport and we mustn't fall into hate for any one community. We're all one people, and so on. That never happened, and I wonder whether there may have been plans for that once this has happened. Like they've got a template plan they can adapt to. Oh, something happens in Carlisle, something happens in Wolverhampton. We can do whatever we need to do there, and this is how we'll adapt it to that place. They'll adapt it when they need to. I wonder if there was something like that planned for a weekday later that evening, or maybe the weekend. But after they saw that the vigil that took place on Tuesday was a preceded unrest, they thought, well, the mood's a bit too hot for that. We're past the point where this sort of shit would work. You know, we're past the point where we can count on a crowd to turn up and be well behaved and not start chanting "Stop the boats" or "2-tier care" or whatever.
Yeah.
When because there wasn't any large scale vigil in Southport. I mean, the most recent example, I referenced this in passing earlier on, in June of 2023, Valdo Calacane, he was like an African in the country via Portugal. He went and killed a 66-year-old university caretaker, Ian Coates, and 2 university students in the early hours of a Wednesday morning or something. Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Kamara went on a stabbing spree, and he murdered them. There was an initial vigil, and then there was one on the Friday afternoon where Barnaby Webber's mother spoke and made all the right noises the regime would want, and they had imams there and this community leader and blah, blah, blah. And it was just, repulsive. They didn't do that in this case. And I wonder whether a judgment, and this would be a kind of a positive indicator of a change of public mood. I'm speculating on this, but I would think they would want one if they thought it would still work. But it led me to wonder, like, given that there was that immediate unrest after the initial vigil, did they sort of shelve any plans for that, thinking, the public mood is too far past that, and that the atmosphere is too volatile for them to be able to count upon, hold an event that could serve its intended purpose, which is to enable them to mask the real public mood and to shape or reshape a national response in the direction of passivity and kind of like supplication before the regime's dogmas of like diversity, but we're all one people. The diversity is brilliant, but we're all together. We're all the same. And because the problem you've got with that is if it's a big television spectacle and everything else, and then it gets hijacked by authentic anger, and it's stop the boats and it's this, that, the other, and it's booing for the regime's sentiments. Not only has it failed in its purpose of trying to kind of create an artificial public response of passivity, it's just acted as a platform for the thing that it was meant to try and suppress. It couldn't be worse. And I wonder whether they had to make that call. And if in that regard, again, what we've seen since Southport is indicative of a bit of a, maybe not a watershed moment, because again, people's memories are short, but they will remember this kind of thing the next time there's a foreigner commits an atrocity against children or something. This will be remembered. And I just wonder if it's like, yeah, that shit's not going to fly anymore. People are kind of onto it, or more importantly, that it's not so much that they're onto it; they're just a bit too angry for it now. And again, indirectly, the things you've talked about, people aren't as comfortable. That may also play into it. They're a little bit more agitated and a bit more put upon in daily life. But
that's very interesting.
People are maybe a bit too angry to be placated by hashtags and slogans and feeling like they're joining in and being part of it by putting a new border or filter on their social media profile photos anymore. There's maybe too many people that aren't going along with that now and are saying this is bullshit. I don't know.
Yeah, I usually don't like to go along with the comparing totalitarianism to North Korea, because I'm worried that, well, maybe that's a bit of a psyop of my own regime that has caricatured this other thing. I actually have never been, maybe maybe that's exaggerated. Maybe the Tiananmen Square thing isn't what, it's a bit of a ridiculous caricature. And that would go for Ceausescu as well. Where the crowd started to boo, but take that caricature at face value, Ceausescu, where the crowd started to boo and he flies away in a helicopter or whatever happened there. Because basically the idea is that there was full spectrum regime control there. It's Romania, isn't it? I think.
Yeah, Romania.
But there's full spectrum regime control there. It's a totalitarian cult of personality, whatever. And they're told everything. They're constantly told what to believe and pressured and arrested and all of that. And yet, even under that system, eventually people start to talk. And at some point, a crowd at a mass level could sort of turn. Just there's too many lies, too much awareness of it among people has just seeped in. And maybe a crowd could almost be a dangerous thing, even one that's controlled. They're there apparently to adore at the altar of Ceausescu, and yet they could turn spontaneously, organically. It's like the whole "don't look back in anger" for Manchester it makes me sick. That looks for all the world like it came from the intelligence services and affiliated agencies. Yeah, I think it definitely was. Yeah.
It
has to have. It has to have. They laid it on really thick for that, and what a smarmy, horrible message to say, especially when if a Muslim is attacked, they're meant to riot on the streets, or a black person or whatever, or if they get shot by police or arrested. Like,
oh well, just
it's
can I
like,
just put that in its context?
yeah.
Can I put that in its immediate context quickly? So
Sure.
the Manchester Arena bombing, which was carried out by a Libyan whose family basically had ties to MI6 because they'd been involved in the Libyan Islamic fighting group. He'd been sponsored to go off and participate in that, and MI6 had links with them because it was all part of, you know, the Judeo-West's bid to get rid of Gaddafi's regime in Libya. That was in May 2017, and of course it was "Don't Look Back in Anger." Then the Sun, which is kind of the right-wing red-top tabloid in this country. You have an Irish Sun, don't you? Right. Okay. Yeah. So our counterpart. Yeah. The following month, there was a tower block in West London called Grenfell Tower, which was full of immigrants, a lot of them illegals. It was almost entirely populated by immigrants, like mainly non-whites. And there was a fire there, I think, basically because someone had been a bit feckless with how they were operating something. It started a fire. There was flammable cladding on the outside of the building that shouldn't have been on there. And about 90 people died. And it became a big cause célèbre for kind of the Corbynites and people like that. And I think it was the Sun ran with the front page "Time for Anger." So when 90 foreigners die in an accident, it's time for anger. But when 22 British people are killed by a foreigner in a terrorist attack, it's "Don't Look Back in Anger." That was, they were about a month apart. So there you are.
Yeah, so much. I mean, so much there to talk about. The trouble is that, like, you're pretty based and clued in on all this stuff, and I think I am too, right? So like, people in our scene or world, sometimes it's hard to pick. Do I want to take the face value take, or do I want to go the full schizo take, or do I want to take like 5 grades in between? Like, how am I thinking? What like frequency am I on? And just you mentioned the guy, the Manchester Arena bombing guy, had connections to MI5 and the Libya and all that. I straight away feel like diving into that, like once we finish here, but because I do love to engage in that, and often it's probably real. We had a stabbing of a Japanese guy by a random Egyptian, I think he was, Mohammed Marai, in Dundalk years ago. Yosuke Sasaki was the guy who was killed, some student. And they totally swept that under the rug. They said he's insane. There were media blackouts sort of in the first day or two. Stories were changed. Things were totally revoked. It was very weird how that went down, right? And they sort of played this thing, of like, oh, we don't really know who he is at all. Like, and I know we have unvetted male migrants and stuff, but they really, for weeks, they were like, we just don't know who he is. Then they kind of said, oh, he's this guy, he's that guy. There's just never any more said of it. It's like, okay, he's a Muslim from whatever, but like, who is he? What part of it? Let's say he's Egyptian. What part of Egypt is he from? Can we research? Can an independent journalist from Ireland go to that part of Egypt, some town somewhere, find out about him? Like, can we track it down? I'd say you would be at very closed doors if you tried to figure that out. It would be a black hole.
Yeah.
It's like, I know he's a Muslim from abroad, but Muslims from abroad aren't aliens. We could find out more. Nothing, right? So it's this guy who came in and did that. Then there was 2 gays were beheaded in Sligo, and I think one of the things they found with him, the
Kurdish,
the guy, is that he had a duffel bag with like hundreds of thousands in cash with him, stuff like that. Like, there's a lot of that goes on too, where you kind of think, who are these spooks? Also, like Georgians, so many Georgians and Ukrainians who are involved in Western gay ops will go through the likes of Britain and Ireland for sure. They'll be groomed and dealt with here. So when random stuff pops off, kind of like the Las Vegas thing again, the shooting there, where you go, well, like when these violent outbursts happen and there's just no real explanation, you have to wonder, was it something like some messed up scenario internally? Was
it one of their high-risk strategies that didn't achieve its intended purpose? So it's like, well, shit, better not talk about that anymore then.
Or a spook going off the reservation, or a thing getting messy. Something got messy and it got sorted out in some way or something. But that's one way of looking at it. But the "Don't Look Back in Anger" message, I find it fascinating. Your idea that, back to the Ceausescu thing, is that they thought maybe a few years ago we'd have gotten people together and covered it over with this sickly sweet kind of we all love everybody type of thing. And not the Antifas and the uber liberal activists. We'll get like the normal people from town. We'll shepherd them together, and we'll get them sort of hypnotized and to get them all to hug each other, hug a Muslim, whatever, hug a Rwandan. But they would have seen that you have a Ceausescu situation there, where it's like, if we get all these people together and they're not paid activists, they're just normal people from around, we try to cast a spell over them, maybe they will start to murmur among each other, like with the Ceausescu crowd, where they're sitting there watching this.
If it's not a complete Potemkin village, it could go very badly wrong. Yeah,
and like maybe they'll have a leader speaking who's saying, "Oh, we're all in this together" or whatever, and you know, someone in the crowd just goes, "Sounds like bullshit to me, to be honest." You know, maybe you know, what about the English? You know. And it's like, oh shit, you know, so they can't have people, they can't let people literally congregate at all. That's how bad it might be in England, that they cannot have people congregate, even in a group of 50, to light candles or peacefully, you know, hang out. Dangerous. So we cannot encourage some kind of like gay, sickly sweet fake op, because actually, unless everybody there is paid activist by the state, then we're in danger. We always
unless it's a complete stage managed spectacle, you know. And it's like I said, this is one of the problems they've got of kind of occupying that grey zone between everything being a Potemkin village and actually being real. It's like, yeah, okay, they kind of semi-orchestrate what we saw on Wednesday evening, and you've got all these like almost triumphant counter demos, but it's still a real mixed race Labour councillor who probably hates non-compliant. Well, clearly does hate non-compliant white people with a murderous vengeance. Who's there on camera saying, you know, there's far right Nazi fascists in this country and we need to slit all their throats and get rid of them. It ain't great, because then they've got to, and then particularly when they're being accused of two-tier policing, they've then got to go and remand that guy in custody, lest they say, well, that guy's just called for mass murder of white people. So, you know, to a baying mob, by the way, who might, you know, who knows, some of them go out and try and action it, you know. So, yeah, these are the problems they create for themselves. One other thing I'll say, actually, it's funny you mentioned North Korea. Just a little, you know, a little trivial takeaway for anybody that you know, most people listening to this won't know who I am, but like, if you don't, you won't have heard me point this out before, which is that, I mean, I remember reading a thing once about North Korea, fascinating thing called A Year in Pyongyang. There was a guy who was a graduate from Leeds University in the 1980s. And Leeds, I think it was Leeds University, they had an exchange program, or one of the universities in Leeds had an exchange program with the University of Pyongyang or something, because they were quite left wing and they wanted to sort of take a more sympathetic view of a communist, communist country. He went there and worked for the Korean government, basically not translating its English language propaganda, but tidying up the translation. So taking it from effectively being Korean sentences written with English language and vocabulary to making it comprehensible to English readers in a way that was normal. And he died of cancer in the 90s, but he'd written a memoir of it. And he talked about what a mad place North Korea was in the late 80s. And one of the things he said is they opened their first golf course, and Kim Il-sung, who was this kind of dear leader, elevated to kind of godlike status there. It's his grandson that runs Korea now. Kim Jong-il was his son, and it's Kim Jong-il's son that runs North Korea now. Kim Il-sung, they said, like, he never played golf before, but the first time he played golf, he got a hole-in-one on every hole. You know, so the propaganda was like ridiculous. But think about it like this. It's exceedingly unlikely that Kim Il-sung picked up a golf club for the first time and then got a hole-in-one on every hole of an 18-hole golf course, right? Probably didn't happen. But it's physically possible. Now, I don't know if you know about this, Garrow, but on our 50p pieces in this country, or on some of them, we have diversity built Britain. And we're literally told to believe that, you know, migrants built our NHS, despite the fact that our NHS was founded in 1948, when it was later that year, the Windrush docked with a few hundred Jamaicans on it. And even in 1951, Britain was like 99.9% white. You know, we're supposed to believe that there were loads of blacks cutting around England in the Victorian age. We know none of that is even possible. Whereas, you know, Kim Il-sung, maybe he got at least one hole-in-one. So that just gives you some context on how ridiculous the things it's demanded we at least pretend to believe are in the West. I mean, the sinister counterpart they go with in Ireland for you like is, well, listen, what's wrong with infinite Somalis? Because some Irish people left and went to America years ago, didn't they? So, you know, just say nothing to the fact that the Irish people here now are almost entirely descendants of the people that didn't leave Ireland, and also they're two different things, so it doesn't justify it. But yeah, there you go.
At least North Korea is North Korean. You know what I mean? It's Korean.
Yeah.
Just full stop.
Yeah.
Like they can recover from whatever that is. You know, their regime can adjust and change over time, soften, become more. Let's say the sanctions, the American regime could sort of fade off. Then the sanctions regime dies off. They don't have to be so defensive. So the cultural weirdness, they can kind of relax on that internally a little bit. Same with Iran, maybe to a lesser extent, but they can relax on that. They can relax on their domestic suppression. Because of the external threat is reduced, and they can trade more with the world and chill it out a little bit. And now you'll have a like beautiful Korean place, and they won't have to have all this weird gay stuff and strange feminist destructive stuff to like human existence itself, you know, biology, like reproduction and stuff. And they can be like have survived it, much like when, you know, East Germany was still kind of based when it came out of communism. You know, it actually survived under the permafrost of something else. But you know, that won't be the case certainly for Britain, unfortunately, or the likes of Canada, especially, is very bad. It's over, like, for a lot of these places. Here's one other question for you as well: is like how. And it's funny because anybody who's neither Irish or British might think it's strange that we are speaking to each other like we're different species or whatever. But it is actually, there are big distinctions. Like you say, it's 5 times more densely populated over there.
5.7, yeah.
Everything's a bit different. So yeah, so it's around nearest to 6, closer to 6 then. But like, you know, everything is different. The Windrush generation, the immigration and that too is it's a couple of layers deeper than Ireland. It's still very new. Like everybody is a generation deep. There are no major major Muslim communities like militant or like Birmingham and all that. We just don't have that yet. How over is it in Britain from a objective point of view, not an idealistic nationalist, just demographically? Like, I don't want to put you onto like a 1 hour, because of course you could, it's an endless answer you could give to that. Like, are the cities gone?
Yeah, well, put it this way, mate. Look at it like this, right? And I hate having to say this, but other than Muslims kind of running amok in Birmingham, which is like very heavily, I mean, Birmingham's like majority native anyway, but Pakistanis are a big group among that. But Pakistanis, wherever they go, they're just they're an implacably aggressive, hostile, collectivist people. Possibly owes part to the fact that most of the Pakistanis in Britain are from Mirpur, and of those, about 50% marry their first cousins. In places like Bradford, it's like 75%. So the consanguinity, you know, to put it in layman's terms, the inbreeding is pretty pronounced. I mean, they're about 10 times more likely to. They're about 10 times more likely to have children born with like congenital birth defects and stuff like that. But I mean, no, the cities are bad because I mean, you've not seen a lot of this unrest in London. Because what white communities are there, and there are pockets, places like Bermondsey, but what white communities are there left to rise up? It's deprived largely white towns still. Like, you know, it didn't, there was a bit of it in Manchester, as I said, on that Wednesday evening, but it's places like Sunderland. And don't get me wrong, like it's, you've got like these weird foreigners everywhere in Britain and a lot, you know, the small towns as well. And, you know, like the village where I live, they're moving people in from Walsall who are kind of like, you know, second generation Caribbeans or Africans or whatever. And it gets everywhere. But it's places like Hartlepool and Middlesbrough, and a lot of Muslims, you know, a lot of Pakistanis and that up in and around Middlesbrough. But it's a lot of places that are still 70, 80% white. But in places where, like Bradford, where it's like, you know, or like Leicester, there wasn't really any of this because it's probably too far gone. It's too far gone for that kind of resistance. And the white people there probably know that. That's a very sobering realization. I mean,
what was that last place you mentioned?
Actually, this is amazing. Did I say where? Sorry, Leicester, was it?
Leicester is, where is that again?
Leicester is in the East Midlands. So Leicester's about, 45 minutes to the east of Birmingham.
And that's like a province, it's not a city.
Yeah.
Is it a city or a province?
It's a city. You know, it is a city. Yeah, there's a county of Leicestershire, but Leicester is a city of about probably, 400,000 people or something.
And you're saying
it's like a kind of
it's too far gone. You're saying that's too far gone.
Oh no, Leicester demographically, because I mean a lot of Indians in Leicester. Leicester is about Leicester 700,000 population actually. It is about as white as London is. And it's funny I mentioned Leicester because I'll tell you something. Yeah, I'll tell you something amazing in a minute. Yeah, Leicester, loads of Indians especially, but a lot of Pakistanis, a lot of everybody. It's only about 40% white. To give you some idea, basically, London's maybe about 35% British now, 30% if that. It's more like probably 35% white and about 25 to 30% British, maybe. Birmingham is majority foreign. Manchester is majority foreign. Leicester, Luton, and Slough are all majority foreign. Places like Coventry are getting there, Nottingham. So yeah, and the thing with this is Leicester. Okay, here's my example. Matched with a woman from Ukraine on a dating app just over a week ago. 29-year-old woman, originally from Ukraine. She's in. Sorry.
Researching, yeah.
Did you say? What do you say? Well, amazingly, the thing is, like, if ever I match with a European woman on a dating app, I'll ask her what they think of England. If they're like an immigrant from Europe in this country, you know, Italians and Greeks and whatever. Well, so she's Ukrainian now. obviously, let's put this in its context. I asked her what she thought of England. Now, Ukraine, as well as being in the... She left Ukraine. She teaches English to Ukrainian refugees now. Ukraine, as well as being in the grip of the bloodiest war on the European continent since 1945, was, before that war began, far and away the poorest and least developed country in Europe, but by quite a way. I asked her what her impressions of England were based on living in Leicester, and she said, "Let me go and read it, because I thought this is incredible. It didn't surprise me in the least. I wasn't in the least bit surprised, but I thought this is kind of quite the propaganda point, to be blunt about it. Let me go and find it on my channel. Here it is. Right. So she said, this is a direct quote. I copied and pasted this. I mean, England is not the best country for me to live. Too many Indians in my city, Leicester. Dirty streets. A lot of crazy people on the street, especially the city centre. I don't feel safe and comfortable there. Weather sucks, not enough sun. Well, I mean, the last 2 points, it was always that way. But the rest of it's all pretty new. So this is a woman from far and away the poorest country in Ukraine, which she had to flee because it was in the grip of the bloodiest war since the end of the Second World War in Europe. And she's saying basically what a shithole Leicester is. And it's because of foreigners.
And by the way, she's probably getting like a lot of her stuff for free. So, you know, like if she's annoyed, then think about how the average Brit feels. Like she's on the gravy train, and even she's like, you know, horrified by it. That's crazy. So like because the idea that people, maybe a lot of Americans are a little bit more removed, they think London is full of foreigners, and then it's sort of fine outside of that. Like there's London and there's the rest of England, the heartland of England, where it's like jolly old England or something like that. But it's it's really not. You know, obviously,
it's fucking awful.
It's
awful.
Yeah, like any large settlement, any large city, like this. Here's one for you, because it's probably the shorter answer. What would be the largest, most British place you could think of? Like one that's sort of somehow hung on and it's still got a decent population, and you go there and it's actually a lot of English people there. Is there one you can think of at all?
I mean, it depends on where you put in your threshold for largely English, because I'm just going to go and look at the demographics of Newcastle upon Tyne. But yeah, go on. Sorry.
Like you can basically bring the threshold down until you hit bingo. You know.
I mean, it's a difficult one, because I mean, I was going to say Newcastle, but I mean, you know, Newcastle upon Tyne, it's you know, Morgoth would often talk about the fact he's from North Tyneside, he's from Newcastle. He would talk about the fact that, you know, it's only more recently that you've kind of had this immigration up there. But it's a point worth making that there was a massive Muslim rape scandal in Newcastle. It doesn't take many for awful things to happen as a consequence of this imported diversity. But you know, Newcastle and Liverpool, you will probably find are still noticeably a little bit more white than other places if you go there. For one reason actually being partially is that some of the post-war immigration was directed economically. So a lot of the early waves, it was to textile mills in Yorkshire and Lancashire, whereas, you know, Newcastle and Liverpool, the port cities. Liverpool was traditionally kind of a dot, you know, port city. It was at one time very wealthy because of that. And, you know, before the Manchester Ship Canal, before air freight, Newcastle was a shipbuilding town and kind of coal mining around the wider area. So those were industries in decline in the 20th century, particularly after the Second World War. So there maybe wasn't such a cause to, well, we'll send those people there. We'll send these new people there. Both of those are maybe 70% native or something. But I mean, it's been changed rapidly everywhere. I don't actually... Okay, so in 2011, whites were 85.3% of Newcastle. But, you know, you've got loads of foreign enclaves in all these places. You've definitely got like large foreign enclaves in all these places, and places in, you know, and I don't know them, but places in those towns that are a byword for just, oh, it's Pakistanis there, it's Somalis there, it's Africans there, and so on. So nowhere escapes.
Here's another one for you. You look away, but like, just I'll throw another one at you. So, what I heard years ago about Britain and England especially was that because it's been decades now where you've had the Bradfords and the you know, all these, right? That's been sort of a foregone conclusion for a long time. But they used to say that, well, over there, you get outside the cities and everyone's English. Ireland obviously was like that too until recently, but they started planting it up very intentionally. But that Britain actually hadn't done that. It was all in the cities, and then you go outside and you can get to England. Like, you can find it. You just leave those cities. Is that changing now? Like, is it that you go to a place for of like, 500 people or whatever, some place like that, and are you seeing foreigners there too?
Yeah, as I said, I mean, the village where I live, it's a fairly large village. It's a couple of thousand people, but yeah, you see quite a few foreigners now. I mean, to the point where, as I said, like, there's new housing here, and the housing association have moved people in from Walsall, which is a town on the edge of the Black Country, so-called not for demographic reasons, but it was a former industrial heartland where the air was black because of the foundries and the chimneys and whatever else. But they're moving people in from there. And I can go back a couple of years and think not long after they were moved in, there was stuff. There were people irate on the village Facebook group talking about, there were these youths shoplifting and being a nuisance around by the shops. I think people can probably, sweepstake in the chat for what colour they were. Yeah, there you are. So yeah, it gets everywhere because they want it to, and this is all illustrated. I'm just trying to see the demographics of Newcastle in 2021, and I can't find it. Just an example of a reasonably large city that is maybe not yet close to being majority foreign. Yeah, I'm just looking at the Newcastle 2021 census, but what did it say? I don't think that 81.7% white Newcastle was in 2021.
White British or just white?
I'll tell a lie. Actually, no. Newcastle on time postcode. It's hard to find reliable information. Actually.
Oh yeah. And even the reliable information is not necessarily reliable. Like, it's
according to this Newcastle upon time postcode, and I don't know how far that spreads, but 81.7% white. But I mean, within white British, it doesn't identify. It doesn't distinguish white and white British in there. Maybe 75% white, perhaps, is in white British.
Yeah, and then if you factor in the fact that like a lot of, let's say, I don't know, a house full of Roma gypsies, and by the way, for YouTube and for the government who are perhaps listening, not only do I not disrespect them, I think they're the best people in the world.
Oh, they're brilliant.
Who I think you'd want to be a lunatic to not see that they are some of the most beneficial people to any society. But the likes of them, like some people would say that they might live in some big house together, and people are in and out of the country. Sort of black market people will say, how many of those are sitting down and doing out the census, right? So you have to always factor that in. Like, let's be real. Yeah. So if you're getting like anytime I see a census that says a town is 75% white or whatever, I automatically just go, okay, that's 65 for starters, or somewhere there. And then you factor in the other thing too, which is crucial, is that might be the case, right? But of course, the demographics for Newcastle is heavily skewed because everybody over, let's say, the age of 50, and there's a baby boomer generation there, is all white British, right? So if you were actually to disaggregate it per age and say what's the demographics of people between the ages of 15 and 35, it's going to be a different story. And that's obviously what matters. Once that's done, it's done. So and like all the boomers as well, even qualitatively, like when you go out to Newcastle or something, a lot of the boomers are going to be either in fancy hotels getting like lunch every 2 days or like every day. If you go to one of these hotels in Ireland, it's like living in the 90s, like a hotel where if you go in and drop €50 just kind of go in and buy lunch, and it's a little bit of a drive. It's like outside of town, and those kind of destination sort of Sunday lunch hotels, full of boomers with loads of money, but they're not in the city, they're not young, they're not in hospitals, they're not in playgrounds, they're not in schools, or they're in hospitals, but you get what I mean. And they're not in maternity hospitals. But so when I hear like 75% or something like that white British, I just think, you're basically goose is cooked there already. You're circling the drain towards 50.
In 2021, I mean, in 2021, I've done numbers on this before as well, kind of adding various sources of information up together and then trying to factor in for non-completion of census documentation and so on. Just before I do, I mentioned Liverpool as another sort of relatively large city I could think of that's probably still relatively white. I'm on Liverpool City Council's website, and apparently in the 2021 census, white, English, Welsh, Scottish, Northern Irish, or British stands at 77%. So it's 23% non-whites or non-British whites.
And that's also a virile population too in Liverpool specifically. Like a virile native population, or native/Irish. A lot of them are Irish, obviously, descendant too. But of this neck of the woods, of this part of the world, like it is. Liverpool does seem to have some balls on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Liverpool's Liverpool's a funny place because a lot of people in nationalist circles sort of expect anyone from Liverpool to be like a left-wing imbecile, and because there's a certain archetype of Liverpool. I'm a Liverpool fan myself. Obviously, I'm not from Liverpool, but I'm a Liverpool fan. There's a certain archetype of Liverpool fan who's very left-wing, and they're very left-wing because of, I mean, the Irish thing is part of it, a sense of otherness. That's one part of
I'd
it
say
historically
it is.
with Liverpool.
I'd say
yeah, no, definitely.
totally.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, definitely. It absolutely is. Yeah, and it's a big part of the whole. There's a thing about, particularly among Liverpool fans, of like some of them they'll chant, "We're not English, we're Scouse," and Scouse not English. They don't support the England football team. But it'll be like, there was kind of Liverpool had a very left-wing city council in the 1980s, and they were open warfare with the Thatcher government. You had the Hillsborough and Heysel disasters, in which they were perceived as being thrown under the bus by the Conservative government in Westminster, which actually they were. They had a legitimate claim on that. But of course, what are these grievances against what they perceive as the kind of like the established power structure? What do they feed into? They feed into, well, yeah, sod the English. It's almost like a sort of an outgrowth of the Celtic nationalisms that get co-opted into anyone but the English. Not everyone, not anyone but the English, but everyone but the English in unlimited numbers. Wales wanted to be a sanctuary country. Yeah.
But it's like the let's say the working class type of communities in Ireland, because that's the similarity I see is to like the Dublin estates and stuff. When I see Liverpool, I see the same literal phenotypes staring out at me, and type of attitudes and stuff. And it's like, it's just like that here too. It's, you have that veneer of the some of the football clubs are kind of controlled to have this Antifa thing, and it's rife throughout Sinn Féin. But the reality is, most Sinn Féin voters, most of the people on the estates, the represented people, they don't buy into that. It's just it's like an NGO leadership class or whatever. I don't think it's, and some of them go out and say, I'm not English, or they but in reality they're based and they've got good attitudes, and they're not really,
they've got instincts.
It's like they're not really like that Antifa sort of almost, what's the word for it, like insolence towards like they're always trying to pull that card in some way, like they're trying to say that like it is almost like everything is a British plot as well, that they try to play that, like, so if like the joke we have is that like Tommy Robinson and MI5 are running the Irish far right, who want a Irish speaking Gaelic ethno state.
That's it. I mean? That's
the
Brits. The Brits are conspiring to psyop the Irish nationalists into restoring an Irish ethno state. Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't make any sense. So and it's the same. But at the end of the day, you strip away those sort of that veneer. And Liverpool seem to have, at the end of the day, they have the people who'll get out on the street and sort of get angry and
that's definitely that's definitely the case with Liverpool. And I'll always defend Liverpool as a whole, because it has like a kind of nationalist can sometimes, because there's an archetype of Liverpool fan that you see on Twitter, and a lot of them aren't even from Liverpool, but they're just like, they just buy into regime socialism, basically. But I mean, off the top of my head, I mean, I can think of 5 political prisoners in Britain, nationalist political prisoners. 2 of them are from Liverpool. James Costello's from Kirby, which is kind of Greater Liverpool, and Chris Kearney, better known as Charlie Big Potatoes, is from Croxteth. But I mean, just on the demographic point with England, just to give you an idea, for England and Wales anyway, and actually Britain, or not Britain, but the United Kingdom as a political entity, which obviously it includes Northern Ireland, the idea of the UK and so on. I did some number crunching about a year ago based on the 2021 census, based on immigration rates subsequently and so on. So I'll just read that out. So I did some number crunching. According to the 2021 census, the population of England and Wales, because it didn't have the results for Scotland and Northern Ireland, but I went on numbers I could get to to sort of add those up. According to the 2021 census, the population of England and Wales at the time was around about 59.6 million. Of that 59.6 million, 25.6% were foreigners. That includes white foreigners. They were foreigners. And again, that's without getting into non-complete 15.25 million people or more. That doesn't include foreigners in Scotland, or if you're going to include it, Northern Ireland. Then consider that you're going to have a couple of million or so illegal immigrants in the country, at least. Then consider that there's going to be far higher rates of non-response to census documentation among Roma Gypsies and Bangladeshis and Somalis and whatever else than there is among English people and Welsh people. Then consider that immigration since 2021 by that time had probably averaged 1.5 million a year. Net terms, it was maybe 700,000, but a lot of the people leaving were white. Most of the people coming in weren't white, and they weren't British people returning. So it's probably safe to assume at that time, and it'll be more now, that there are about 20 million foreigners and counting in the UK, and probably 15 million of them are probably non-white. So that's an idea of what it's like.
And then if you were to do it per age demographic, which is all that matters.
Yeah.
So it's like to me, it's totally, it's just a fact, like logically as well, that basically looking at overall demographics is not like, it's actually completely misleading. It's almost like it's almost like because some people think, oh, it's a niche thing to look at the age cohorts. Basically, the real question is the overall demographic, and then you can get niche on the age demographics. Whereas it's like, no, the age, breaking it down for age is what matters, and the overall demographic is actually completely arbitrary, and it doesn't really answer any question. Because what are a bunch of boomers going to do above the age of 60? They're not going to reproduce. They're not going to have kids. They're just going to die in a couple of decades, and that's all they have left to do, in a sense, right? No offense to anyone older. It's not your life matters, but you know what I'm saying. Like in terms of the life cycle, that stuff is done now. That's going to be very offensive to anyone over the age of 60. I've just you know what I mean? Don't take it badly.
Yeah, but that's absolutely right. Yeah. I will say in Britain, like native births are only, I think they're less than 60%. They're probably in the mid to high 50s. All births, is into kind of white British mothers and so on. But
let's say here's the thing. The way I look at it, right, is that let's say, so there's births, right? But let's go with your average. You pick an English 18-year-old at any freeze frame that English guy. He's 18, and he in his city, wherever it is, a middle city, where he says he's 60% of his demographic are English. That'll probably be doing well, right? 60% of his demographic are English, but there are millions of people being brought into Britain at the moment, foreigners, and those foreigners are all between the ages of 18 and 35, right? So they're not spread out age demographics, right? They're all squared. So as he turns from 18 to 25 to 35, every year his 60% gets hammered by several percentage points, like more rapidly than the national population ever does. And if we broke this down in Ireland, it's hard to get the right stats, but it's we figured out that nationally, people say, oh, we're going to be a minority here in 30 years and stuff like that, looking at the overall number. And we realize that if you're an average Irish lad who's 18 years old, you're going to be a minority within your age demographic, which is all that matters, in like 5 or 6 years. So it's over. And that's the kind of rate we're talking about. People don't get that. And and it's more pronounced over Wichí, because all you have to do is look at London. If you want to be a nationalist in London and get a nationalist demo together and say, we want England, have its own rights and sovereignty and demographic sovereignty and stuff like that. Stop immigration, stop discriminating against whites, even if you're really sort of optical and just pleading for some fairness, right? You're going to get hounded. You're going to have, roving armies of Muslims there, and the state backing them up. Like, it's like whatever about Liverpool and Newcastle and stuff. I don't think it would be physically, biologically possible to have like a white British political scene or something in London, which is your capital city, and that's gone. And most of the other cities are too. Whereas it's like, even if, here's what I worry about, right? Because people say it's the state, it's the British state, the British gay opera state leaning on everything, creating all this. That's true. But let's say the state walked away. They said, let's just leave London be London now. The whites can come out and protest their replacement, and the Muslims can come out. We're going to stay out of it. Maybe it's still too late for the Brits, right? Like, they just don't have the men. They don't have the people.
Yeah, because I mean, the other aspect of this is just lack of extended families, broken nuclear families, lack of collectivism, lack of racial consciousness. The one thing that I hope people's memories are long enough for it to come out of what we've seen over the past couple of weeks is a greater sense of racial consciousness and a sense of being, the racially targeted victims of injustice. But yeah, that's a problem. That is a problem because of the lack of collectivization, the lack of solidarity. Of a white lad gets into trouble, he can't get on the phone and call 25 of his mates to be there within 2 minutes from his area.
Yeah,
Pakistanis will.
Yeah.
So there are going to be harsh lessons to be learned over the coming years, unfortunately. But
yeah.
But yeah,
that's pretty grim. But like, here's a positive note: is that the internationalized, much like with Ireland, are now on specifically England.
Yes.
Really, now you have this sort of, and some of that as well as psyop too. Like you could talk about CIA and whatever. But let's take it at the face value tier for now. Like, I do think there's the pressure is on the British state now with two-tier Keir and like all the kind of Musk tier stuff.
Yeah.
The whole world is watching now, and it's becoming like illegitimate. Like, I mean, the outside world, even in Ireland, when we're bad, we have it bad. Like I thought we did, and I'm looking at you specifically, and you people, your people. You'd be like, "What do you mean, you people?" But
you said you people. Yeah. You people. That's an ethnic slur. You ever watched The Irishman? You ever watched The Irishman? Yeah.
No, but I've seen Tropic Thunder.
Oh, okay, yeah.
As well, it's the same idea. But I'm just like, holy shit, they're really like, it's really bad. It's the North Korean thing is not a stretch at all. Like, it's as bad as any sort of caricature we have of North Korea. It's really bad.
Yeah, but one thing that was interesting about all of this is that there's one other point that I'd make about it after, maybe if we get the opportunity, but is that there was a lot of talk, and I had this in my notes for one of the streams I was on last week somewhere, so I'm going to try and find it because I kind of phrased it well in the notes that I made. The British state were talking about wanting to extradite people who, as they saw it, were rabble rousers. Now, there are people they could extradite Tommy Robinson. Tommy Robinson, supposedly, he got to Cyprus or somewhere, didn't he, after refusing to let the counter-terror access his phone or whatever. I don't know the full details of that, but they were talking about wanting to extradite kind of what they call foreign influences. And, there is this incredible swivel-eyed paranoia among regime loyalists, journalists saying, like, Matthew Stadlin, he's a radio journalist, he's half Jewish, talked about how, like, he tweeted when white people were kind of protesting and the protests were spilling over into unrest. Like, do these people not realize that, they're doing Putin's work for him? They have this paranoia about the foreign enemy. And they're doing this thing where, if I can just find here we go. Let me just go back to my other notes. It's quite amazing. There was talk of wanting to extradite people, and I'm just going to try and go back and find it now. So,
yeah, take your time.
It suggested real. Hang on a minute. Let me just find it. Did I say? I think I used the word deluded, so I'm searching on that basis. No, it wasn't that. The words I used in my notes to myself. Here we go. So what I'd seen was, there was a British prosecutor talking about extraditing social media influencers abroad that they deemed to have had a role in inciting the riots. This talk of extraditing foreign influence, what you're going to, I mean, presumably they're only including people like that have got British passports, but like, what are you going to do? You want to try and go after Elon Musk? Like, it just sounds deranged and delusional. And like, there is a degree of them in their panic and their sense of entitlement to just have blanket compliance. They're embarrassing themselves in front of the world, and like they are, Academic Agent made a point about the using 20th century tactics in a kind of a 21st century information battle space, so to speak. That's my way of phrasing it. And it's like, well, yeah, in a globalized world where there are kind of social media platforms where, for all the censorship and astroturfing, there is some degree of the democratization of information, where someone at a protest in Stockton-on-Tees can take a video and post the video, and it shows the police using brutality against white people. You have a problem because the world will see that. I mean, one of the problems, I went on to make this point, actually. This is one of my main conclusions. When Wednesday night, there was this talk of all these nationalist demonstrations. They didn't happen. You had the counter demonstrations. And then lo and behold, Thursday morning, every newspaper, including the right-wing mid-market, so the Daily Express, the Daily Mail, and the Guardian and the Times, they've all got the same photo and very similar headlines. You had Nick Lowles, who I mentioned from Hope Not Hate earlier, admitting to somebody on Twitter, and again, this is a little bit like the Ricky Jones thing of the fact that, you're true believers will let you down. They will make you suffer for the fact that you can only partially orchestrate this, because they'll kind of let the side down a little bit. Like, I mean, for example, I'm trying to find this thing again that I posted. I think it's only a few days ago. I can just scroll back up. Nick Lowles, who was the head of Hope Not Hate, he had said, yes, the list. So this is the list of supposed locations for like white demonstrations. Yes, the list was a hoax, but just look at the front pages of today's newspapers. An anti-racist message is being transmitted to millions of homes this morning. Now, that's not a good thing, because some people will buy it, but those that buy it are people that, with the greatest respect, they've got a bit less agency anyway. They are kind of not in the game as much anyway. The real takeaway is, and I can tell you this, from kind of YouTube recommendations, that they weren't recommended to me because they thought, because they probably because they did think that I would be receptive to it, because they don't know me well enough. They weren't recommending it as red meat for me, as it actually would be. But the newspapers are dying medium. But mainstream media is not dead, but faith in it among white people is declining. I mean, so they've gone for this whole spectacle of, yay, we faced down the racists. Now, I went on YouTube on Thursday lunchtime, and on the homepage there was the first two videos recommended. There was Mark Rowley, the Metropolitan Chief Commissioner. So I think, closest counterpart would be like Drew Harris. Mark Rowley was there Mark Rowley was praising counter protesters. If you go on that, it's a video from the Times. So this is like, the oldest newspaper of record. It's the UK's newspaper of record. You click on that and all the comments are skeptical and scornful. Good Morning Britain, like ITV's big breakfast television show, they posted a 25-minute segment of their coverage of, everybody faced down the rioters. Same with the comments on there. You scroll through the comments on there and all of it is cynicism, scorn, mockery, contempt, just dissent, basically. And so what you were seeing there, I think, is you were seeing the way that the big lie in the mass media age is constructed in real time. You were seeing one being concocted in real time. A big one we have in Britain is, the Battle of Cable Street in 1936. Mosley tried to march his fascists through the East End, but the communists and the Jews rioted, and they beat him up. No, they didn't. Mosley rerouted his march, so they never turned up. And the communists and the Jews attacked the police. But all these things and the alleged methods of mass execution in labor camps in Poland in the early 1940s and weapons of mass destruction and all of this kind of thing, you're starting to see how these big lies get constructed, because we were living through the concoction of one. So you see how they're concocted and disseminated. But
it's just like the beheaded babies. But go ahead.
40 beheaded babies and whatever else and all that sort of thing. Yeah. And again, that didn't work, because it doesn't work in this age. And I went into a little bit of detail on why, which is that it's a lot harder to sort of sell the narrative where you mumble through all of the, 3 little girls were murdered by a crazed African. Muslim paramilitaries went on the rampage while the police who viciously attacked white protesters groveled to the Muslims and gave them a carte blanche. Oh, and by the way, important takeaway, folks, white people who are unhappy about immigration are the bad guys. Starts with a Rwandan murdering 3 little white girls, and the bad guys at the end are white people who are unhappy about the conditions that allowed it to happen. We've all got to come together against them, guys, to defend our security and our freedom and our multicultural democracy. It doesn't work as well anymore, because, again, talking about the democratization of information in the social media age, you can't really, particularly with somebody like Musk at the helm, you can't memory hole the part of the timeline of events where there were kind of, you can't memory hole the first part of that timeline of events that I mumbled through, because tens of millions of people have seen the Citizen published videos of the aftermath of the African child murder spree and the armed Muslim mobs and the egregious two-tier policing and brutality towards white people and the police directing counter-protesters into peaceful demonstrations. You also, when you've got the ever-increasing presence and the ever-worsening anarcho-tyranny that the British people are suffering imposed by the British state, you can't really sell them on, we've got to keep our society safe, because they don't feel safe anyway. You can't sell, to keep our society safe and free when they're not free to speak their minds, and people are increasingly being sent to jail for doing so. And also, when we talked about the pace of change, and some of that's economic and some of it's immigration, it's like, well, five years ago, even 4 years ago, there were people that could have nodded along with, multiculturalism, yes, all good, it's all right. But they're increasingly alarmed by how foreign the area where they live looks in a way that didn't even 2 years ago, and how much more aggressively anti-white and vicious the media has become. So it gets harder and harder to do it. Now, in a state of panic, which I have no doubt they were, the higher ranks of government and the civil service and the police, they probably thought, best course of action here is to do a big controlled spontaneity where we announce fake protest and then everyone comes out and it looks like an emphatic win for the counter protesters. Oh no, that's the public mood and we're all together and it's over now. We put a nice bow on it. We all hate the white people that are angry about immigration and we're all going to live happily ever after with our boot on their necks. That may have looked like the best course of action in the here and now, but as I've said, from many of the things I've seen, there's an ever-growing segment of the white population that are utterly disillusioned, utterly cynical to all of this. And some of them are getting onto the nuts and bolts of how they do this. And the big lie propaganda operations in this age just don't work as well, particularly when they're relying upon them time and again to cover up for the consequences of their demographic and their kind of demographic agendas and their agenda against white people in general. It's just not working as well as it did, or it's not working on as many people as it did. And it'll probably continue to get worse.
That's very interesting. That the idea of setting up the fake thing, almost like getting in before, or the in before, as people say. Like this is almost that melting point. So we're just going to sort of melt it, like go ahead and melt it under our terms, sort of with our narrative, with our setup on it. And it's a very interesting method, and you can see how it's a good idea from their point of view.
For now,
get it, let us do it, sort of. Or like if there's a fight going to start and you get the first headbutt in, or sort of do it, like get it started on your terms. But now the fight has started. If I can continue that analogy, it's like, well, now there is some sort of fight on, right? It's been kicked off. It was half kicked off organically. They tried to get on top of it. They couldn't do the kumbaya, like you were saying. But what they could do was orchestrate sort of like the fake 100 protests that are going to happen and the reaction. But but the cat's out of the bag now. The draconian cat is out of the bag. The global eyes are on Britain, just thinking like, what's wrong with this place? Is insane.
Yeah, what the hell is happening in that place? Yeah.
And
Magna Carta, free speech and all that. Yeah, look at it now. Yeah.
It's pretty mad. One thing I want to say as well, and I will shill late on. What I should have done is at the start mentioned it. Anybody who wants to super chat or get one in, feel free, because we're not going to go on too much longer. Now, one more thing, or well, one or two more things. We know the media is what it is, and we know people are afraid to speak because of political correctness and the fear and all that. But have you been out of the house enough, or sort of been chatting to people enough? Like, it's hard to have these conversations. So I understand if your answer is just like nothing. Is there a tone of, like, if you're chatting away to a bunch of lads now in a fairly average environment, where you're like, I don't know, you're at some event like barbecue or something, and it's the big news. So whether you're against all the crazy racists or you're against the replacement and the two-tier cure, everybody knows about it. It's not a niche thing now. It's not like a really niche politics. It's like if there was a huge earthquake, you'd have to be talking about the earthquake somehow. What are average normal people saying? Are they saying, oh God, these riots are crazy, these racists are, or are they talking about two-tier cure? What's going on?
I mean, it's funny because some of the people I work with, they like know who I am. They're not of the same mind, but they know who I am. And we were kind of having a conversation about this, and their views were not that different from like mine. They wouldn't have been as well informed. One good mate of mine, he was like a big kind of COVID skeptic and that, and was kind of, I knew him long before I was ever in politics, and he was kind of, if I could say I'm in politics, I wouldn't really call it that. He was, he got in touch with somebody via me because I wasn't in touch with him at that time after I got doxxed. But like talked to him quite a bit about it. And I mean, in terms of like immediate family and that, like most of my sort of immediate and extended family, they're the kind of people that would vote reform. So I'm not like, then I'm not a great indicator of wider society. And I don't really have any kind of ties with like typical urbanite graduate, went to university type liberal minded people anymore. Some of which were ties that were literally burned because I would do things like get too angry when a Muslim blew people up at a pop concert and things like that, So in that regard, I'm not the greatest place to give a cross section of society. But I mean, one thing I can tell you about, actually, just on the general subject, not in the immediate aftermath of what's happened over the past couple of weeks, but that in a way maybe makes it even more valid, because a lot of people are going to have been, a lot of normal kind of people that aren't sort of on the Kool-Aid are going to have become more right-leaning because of what they've seen. I will say, I don't necessarily go in with, I'm also the Ayatollah, Britain's most racist YouTuber, when I'm sort of like talking to a woman that I'm getting to know, if I'm kind of like I've met a girl on a dating app or something. But I do talk to them pretty quickly about my worldview, and sort of, because normally, and you'll find with most people, they're kind of somewhat quote end quote racist. I've got that the wrong way around, quote racist end quote, and they're somewhat, they don't like political correctness, they don't like the trans stuff, and you get talking to them, and you're giving them more permission by saying, look, yeah, I'm a realist on all that stuff, and if you speak with a bit of confidence and authority, and you know a bit, yeah, you'll find out that their instincts are not that far from yours. They just don't know as much. Now, they're not going to be as consistent as you are, because, like, I knew I was going to end up saying this tonight, but if you're talking about cross sections of society, the problem you've always got is most people are not going to be that politically useful, because they're suggestible and they're amenable to the last persuasive thing they heard. So, I've always said that, like, well, I've been saying for a long time, and it sounds a bit glib, but I do think it captures it nicely. Like a normie, you know about Enoch Powell, don't you? Obviously,
of course, yeah.
Yeah, so Enoch Powell, British Tory politician who gave the so-called Rivers of Blood speech in 1968, warning that immigration would lead to the black hand having the whip hand over the white man, and it'd lead to rivers of blood and X, Y, and Z. The public supported him overwhelmingly. 74% of the public supported him, but Ted Heath, who was later just, the Tory leader who later became Prime Minister, but after his death was found to have been a prolific child abuser, which is probably why he was in the position he was, immediately sacked Enoch Powell. If I... what was I going to say now about Powell? People will, it's a refrain among sort of like normal English people. Well, Enoch was right, wasn't he? But like the average person is someone who'll say, well, they can say, oh, we're all one people, we're all one human race, and Enoch Powell was right in successive sentences, and not really see that those are kind of somewhat contradictory. They might say, well, we're all immigrants at one point, but Enoch Powell was right. That's a normie for you. But a lot of work, as we've said already tonight, an awful lot of work and a lifetime's background noise of propaganda and conditioning and abuse and carrot and stick and manipulation goes into keeping those people from being you or me. We're the small number of people it doesn't work on who become like active dissidents against the system. So again, I'm not the best indicator, but I will say that, like, and this does seem to be the case more and more, like, again, and this is from talking to women who tend to be more liberal. It's not hard to bearing in mind I'm doing this where there's kind of something on the line for me where it's like, oh, she might not want to get to know me if she thinks I'm a bit racist or something, but I'll just go out and be open about what I believe and everything. Like, I mean, it's becoming a bit of a running joke. Like, if I've kind of had instances where I've kind of been, first date with a woman, and it's ended up with me talking about things to do with what really happened in camps in the 1940s and about who controls the media and things like that.
It's not a bad way to spend a night or an evening. You know what I mean?
What was that? Sorry?
It's not a bad way to spend an evening.
It's not a bad way to spend an evening, and it doesn't seem to put them off. And I mean, I'm not the best looking bloke in the world, so it must be kind of quite compelling. But I mean, I think
also start as a mean to go on. You know what I mean?
Start as a mean to go on. There's plenty more where this came from, babe.
I've got 6 hours worth of this in me every night. You know what I mean? For the rest of your life, like if you're interested,
Yeah, let alone the red pill. Yeah, let alone the red pills. But yeah, that's it. So I mean, in terms of kind of wider society, I mean, I think your average person that's not kind of, I think of this in terms of it's probably like an 80-20 or an 85-15 for white people. About 80% of white people, even if they're apolitical, they're like, well, oh yeah, you won't arrest Muslims as aggressively, will they? The police won't go after the Muslims for that as much, will they, or whatever? And they think there's too much immigration and they're whatever. Yeah, that's the way I see it. But I mean, those people aren't really politically engaged. They've just kind of got the right instincts, but they're not really participating, and they don't have the information and whatever else. So yeah, that's how I think it is. Yeah.
It's funny. Before we went live, I said to Tollah, I said, what kind of time are we going for? You kept it pretty open. You said whatever, and I said, as a caricature, I said, we're not going to do one of these 3-hour things. And and it's 2 hours 36. Now, if I was to go to the loo and come back, I could go more hours, right, and all that. I could go for like another 3. Obviously, we're not going to do that, but I mean, we could talk about the global geopolitics, all this stuff. Maybe we could do that another night. Maybe it's better to just kind of leave it there. It's so much I want to ask you about, like the George Galloway people, totally shit the bed.
I can do as long as you want, mate. I can do as long as you want. Don't worry about that. I mean, I know you may not want to go on much longer, but yeah, it's entirely up to you.
No. Are you happy to interact with the chat for like 30 seconds while I dip out?
Yeah, certainly, that's absolutely fine. Yeah, I'll do my best to hold the fort. If my
Or
internet's
even
gonna
if you
hold up,
just
but
want to mute yourself, you basically do whatever you want. I'll just be back in
no,
like
it's all right. Yeah,
quickly.
I'll hold the fort for a little bit. Yeah, I've seen one or two familiar names in there. It's funny because I'm now looking at the tab,
Yeah.
and YouTube's a little bit behind real time, so I can still see Garrod in the background, whereas I think he's now getting up to
No,
depart.
I'm
Oh,
still there,
okay.
but I am going. I'll be back
Okay.
in a sec.
All right. Okay. All right. I was a little bit premature in trying to take over. Who've we got? I did see Vingle in there tonight earlier on talking about not having listened to me for a while, and yeah, I remember him from streams on my channel going back a while. What have we got in the chat? People are talking about George Galloway, and they're talking about Corbyn as well being Freemasons. I don't know. Who do we have? Not too many familiar names, actually. Yeah, I mean, I suppose English and Irish, we don't overlap too much. Yeah, I mean, it's been a. I think there's an element of before and after. I've said this on my Telegram channel. There's an element of before and after in what's taken place in Britain. I mean, mainly just because of the amount of sustained white non-compliance and unrest we've seen. Mark Collett said this well when I was on PWR with him last Wednesday. He kind of said, white people are normally the first people to calm down in these situations. And by that point, they kind of hadn't. As it turns out, they sort of had, because a lot of the supposed demonstrations that were meant to take place last Wednesday night obviously didn't. And they were kind of, I think that was regime misinformation for the sake of their narrative that I talked about a few minutes ago of like, yeah, we faced down the racists. And it was bait to get the left wing out with their kind of identical Socialist Worker Party placards and their Palestinian flags. And then again, they could have the photo opportunities and they could have the remarkably uniform newspaper front pages saying, oh, the night we faced down the far right thugs and all of that kind of thing. And that, as I said, the newspapers in that regard are entirely complicit, and they're kind of mouthpieces for the deep state, essentially, the intelligence services and, and whatever else. And that's very much how it works. So I think, but I think more and more people are starting to see through that. And you kind of have to remember that a lot of the people that don't, it's like, well, okay, yeah, but what are they going to go out and do? They're not going to do a lot. They're kind of dead weight anyway. So yeah, he's back. He must have been back
I'm
a while.
here, yeah. I'm just enjoying. I'm listening to the show, like,
okay, right,
yeah. Thank you for a true professional.
No
some
problem.
people don't. Some people get very uncomfortable with the solo ramble, but you do that regularly yourself, so you know.
You're saying about 3 hour streams. I did a 3.5 hour stream on my own on Friday night, so yeah.
I've done long ones as well, right? And there's been times I've sort of, when I'm not like the next day or whatever, I think back to it and I think there's actually something like I enjoy. It's good. It's great, right? But in a certain sense, there's something almost psychotic about it, no? Like sitting on your own in a room, pressing on. If you dissociate the people, like I feel connected to all the people in the chat and watching. But if you were a sort of a different type of person, you might look at that and think you're really just talking to a blank screen, though. You're really just talking to like an inanimate object. Yeah. And you're just, like, as in, basically, if there was someone like looking at you while you're doing it, they're like, you're just sitting there. You're not actually talking to anyone, like you and I are now. You're just talking to yourself, basically, for hours on end. Like, what is wrong with you?
No, I've had the same thought before. Okay, I hit on now, and then I'm talking, kind of peering over the top of my laptop screen, talking into the corner of the wall. But I am actually talking to people, but I'm sat here in a room on my own. It is crazy. Yeah, it is really mad. Weird when you stop and think about it. Yeah,
for sure. But so I'm reading chats myself. I think it's great, though. I think it's beautiful. I think it's a great thing. Like and the fact that we can. I just think the internet is a very impressive tool. It's a pity they crack down on it so much. But the organic stream, two people, like you often have Brits and Americans and Australians and people who've never met each other or know each other. Like you and I have no business really speaking. Like we don't. You live where you live. I live where I live, and yet here we are. So I think it's great. But so. Did you see the Galloway thing by any chance? Have you seen his sort of reaction?
I actually haven't, I'm afraid. It's funny because you mentioned it before. I've actually just a few seconds ago Googled him, and like there's a YouTube video from him a couple of days ago, 4 days ago, 2-hour video called Streets of Fire, which sounds a little bit like a mid-80s U2 track. But yeah, I've not watched it. Yeah.
Well, the thing is with him is that he was a sort of tanky leftist or whatever.
Yeah.
And over the last few years, he's veered into this position of like social conservative a bit more, against the trans stuff, and
kind of old left,
Yeah, but even more like kind of dipping his toe into the anti-immigration thing from a sort of a left-wing point of view. You know, it deprives people. It's socially
Workers' Party
destabilizing.
of Great Britain is his concern. Yeah, I mean, he was very
Yeah.
briefly elected as an MP in Rochdale, which is like a mill town that's part of Greater Manchester, very heavily colonized by Pakistanis, and he produced entirely different campaigning material for white areas in Rochdale and Pakistani areas, making very different promises. And he got elected in a by-election, but he was only in Parliament for a few months, and then he lost in the election in July. But there you are, yeah.
But again, it just shows how complicated things are, because what's his name, Rishi Sunak.
What was that? Sorry,
Rishi Sunak. He put it when Galloway was elected in that by-election, and I can't remember the name of it now. Something on something, you know, one of those places.
Where Rishi Sunak constituency? You mean? Sorry.
No, it was Galloway was elected somewhere. But anyway,
where was he elected? Where has George
someone
Galloway
in the
been
chat
an
room.
MP?
I suppose it doesn't matter too much, but he was elected anyway, and so Sunak came out with a speech the next day, like basically our democracy is in crisis type of thing, where we have extremes of the far left and the far right. And it was directly at Galloway, saying that he's an anti-Semite effectively, or something to that fashion. So he is in one sense an enemy, a regime like baddie. They don't like him, obviously, for the Palestinian stuff and that, this, that, and the other. And then he's even made forays into like populist nationalist politics.
Yeah.
And then he just kind of shits the bed then, pardon my language, where, like, you know, when it comes to it, then he's like, all these white racists have to be crushed, you know, that kind of thing. It's like, where's your nuance? Where's the budding nuance that you had discovered, which is that, like, well, you might be against people surrounding mosques based on something Tommy Robinson or Danny Tomo or Tomo Danny or whatever said. Fine. That's fine, right? We don't, like, you know, we don't want any of your tequila here, you know, throwing glass bottles at a mosque. I don't think, I certainly would have no truck with that. I just don't think that's productive at all. I'm like, I'd be more going to the government or the NGO people, kind of saying, stop bringing another million people in here. Like, we can talk about the ethnic, you know, issues later, but directly between groups. But for now, it's more of like a structural thing. Like, what's the policy? It's about the governance, more so than it is going around being angry at the mosque down the road. To be honest, I think anyway. So I'd be with Galloway on that. But then I would expect someone like him to just be reasonable too and say, yeah. Okay, so at the same time, people are entitled to be annoyed. People are entitled to get agitated ethnically, like Black Lives Matter or anti-Israel stuff from the Palestinians and the Muslims, and the whites too. You know, they have a point of view. They have their own, and he's just not entertaining that at all. Now, of course, look, the guy has children, like half mixed race children and stuff. Maybe it's a personal thing. But just as a politician, you would, or just a thinker, because obviously an extremely intelligent person and verbose. But it's just sad to see that. And you even, like, I don't know if you see these, like Suleiman, you know, the guy he was like, he like does stuff with Nick Fuentes and all that.
Yeah, Sheikh Suleiman. And then of course when Le Pen loses in the second round of the French election, he's like, "Oh yeah, the French have come together to vote against the far right, innit, bro?" Yeah.
Love the accent, but like, you know, and it's I don't want to get into like this like right wing bickering and factions and stuff, because I know there are factions who like criticize the Fuentes side of things for hanging out with your man, and you're hanging out with a foreigner who's anti. Like, I would be sort of one of these broad tent kind of like, we can disagree on certain things, but we can also agree on other things, you know. And so even though it seems like we're actually opposite sides of things, we can agree where we agree and be reasonable with each other and like grant leniency to each other's point of view. Even where we disagree, we sort of try to hold the olive branch out. And it is just weird from the likes of the Khaleesi's and Suleimans and George Galloway's, that whole crowd, for them to like just to kind of pull the rug when it comes down to it, you know.
I mean, quite simply, I mean, I just think quite simply, and this could apply to Galloway, it certainly applies to that Suleiman idiot. They don't really comprehend, like, if I'll say I'm a white nationalist, and if anyone's familiar with the Right Stuff Network, they have an old expression. There's two groups of people who know what's going on. I'll sanitize it. One of them have a big dinner on a Friday night, and the other ones are us. And other people have kind of, this might sound narcissistic and self-aggrandizing, but I think it's true. This is why such effort is put into suppressing us and silencing us and criminalizing us and imprisoning us, is because a full comprehension of what's going on and, getting to the heart of it all. There are other groups of people who occasionally they kind of fall foul of the power structure, but they can do that whilst also parroting a load of its propaganda and its pablums on other issues. So that guy Suleiman is an example. So he's a Muslim. He's a Muslim immigrant in Britain or somewhere, and he'll talk to white nationalists out of a shared opposition to Israel. But then he'll be parroting kind of regime propaganda, which, funnily enough, a lot of Jewish people are involved in the peddling of to kind of preserve their own ethnic interests in Europe when it comes to talking about what's happened in the French elections. Or, they've come out to vote against the far-right racists and whatever. Who were you talking to about Israel like a month ago, a week ago? And Galloway's the same, I mean, I've always talked about this with Jeremy Corbyn. So obviously Jeremy Corbyn, you'll be aware, I think not as part of the plan, got elected as Labour leader, and he was a kind of a left-wing populist in 2015. Funnily enough, they formed this movement to kind of support his faction of the party, Momentum, but it was founded by 4 people, and I think at least 3 of them were Jewish. Corbyn was always noted for his opposition to Israel and that kind of thing. And they went after him for that reason. I mean, Keir Starmer, his successor as Labour leader, now the Prime Minister, again, Jewish wife. The first thing he did when he got in was apologise to the Jewish people in Britain if they'd been troubled by, Jeremy Corbyn being critical of Israel and things like that. But this is the same guy.
Yeah, that was a coup. Like I consider that just a full-on coup.
Yeah.
It was
a coup. Yeah.
Like a strategic, like surgical, geopolitical coup, like the way the way like Imran Khan was toppled in Pakistan by like an external regime.
That's exactly it, because it was against Jewish interests to have Jeremy Corbyn leading the Labour Party and potentially getting elected Prime Minister. By the way, Keir Starmer, grovelling apology to the Jews in Britain. This is the same guy he's a barrister, I think, or he's a he's a legal man by sort of profession. He was director of public prosecutions and head of the Crown Prosecution Service between 2008 and 2013. In that time, he did absolutely nothing about Muslim child sexual enslavement of British schoolgirls, which is already a well-known issue. He did nothing. But he'll apologise to Jews because they heard some home truths about Israel that they didn't want to hear from a Labour Party leader. Now, Corbyn is another example. Corbyn, he can be right on some things, but it's usually going to be for the wrong reasons. Like his opposition to Israel comes from another aspect of his ultimately Jewish program in it, that of white people evil. He just mistakes Jews for white people. Hence Israel is an outpost of white settler colonialism and white supremacism, because Palestinians are a bit brown, Jews look white, and he's not got a full comprehension of Jewish ethnic identity and otherness as they perceive it themselves. I mean, Corbyn's interesting in that regard as well, because, and I talked about this when I was on the Absolute State of Britain podcast, one of the things they dug up on him was that in, I think, 2011, he had written a foreword to a new edition of a book from 1902 by John Hobson called Imperialism: A Study. And he was proclaiming what an excellent book it was. I'm just looking to see when it was. Now, this got dredged up when he was Labour leader. I forget when the edition of the book was from. It might have been 2011. I don't know. But Corbyn praised the book. Now, in the book, Hobson talked about the power of a certain ethnic group and their kind of networking and coordination and control. Yeah, it was a 2011 reissue. And I wonder with somebody like Corbyn, like, how do you see that and how do you know it? You must be aware of what's in the book. How do you see that and then not recognise the racial and ethnic element of all of this? How can that be the case? But again, they have blind spots because of other programming they've had, essentially from the same interest group of like, yeah, racism bad and we're all one people and race doesn't exist. And they can stray off the reservation on some of it, but not on all of it. What sets you apart, to be honest, as a white nationalist, or as a nationalist who is white, if you prefer, is unless you are kind of like I'm pro-white people, but like I'm pro-Israel because they're fighting the Muslims, you know what the shot is on all of it. And that's obviously a very dangerous thing. That's why we're lucky to be doing this on YouTube, and we couldn't do it on my YouTube channel. I've got
Yeah. I know. Yeah, I don't know how long this will last. Maybe I'm controlled as well. Sort of like a like a 7, 8, 9D chess or whatever. Somehow this is like controlled spontaneity in a way, maybe. But like The problem is that like the common sense position. So let's just boil it down to Muslims and like English, sort of white English. Even though it's not as simple as that, but those are the two big sort of block groups, really. Cultural block groups and street groups and stuff like that happening or at play. So. And then their strings are pulled. So like the Muslims could be like there could be psyop attacks, ones that are not even that real. Like we don't know about that stuff. Is all a bit dodgy, you know. Or some, you know, definitely it's all a bit dodgy. And then on the other side you have the likes of you know, Tom O'Danny or whatever, with the like the lion and the Israeli flag or whatever it is, like symbolism. I don't know, the St. George's flag with like a star on it and all that, like running around the place and like stirring up stuff about mosques. And nationalists, the likes of you, are aware of what's going on there. Someone like Suleiman or whatever his name is aware of that. He knows. He's spoken to nationalists, right, at length. Because you're talking about how does Jeremy Corbyn not see the blind spots? But just take the likes of a Suleiman or even a George Galloway, because he obviously knows more than he lets on to. He understands. How can they, at the drop of a hat, just kind of lose sight of it? And again, just keep the olive branch out. The olive branch was held out on sort of both sides a little bit. Just when it matters, just keep it out. You know, it's very disappointing because even it just creates a situation where both sides can be totally instrumentalized. Whereas I do actually, like I mentioned Fuentes a minute ago, the thing is people criticize him and people like him for engaging with that. And I actually don't. I think it's, I think that's, I get the idea, right? It's just what is disappointing is when the people that are engaged with the likes of the Suleimans are talks to Syrian girl and she talks to other people, and you know, there's a little network there. And she's an example of a good one, actually. She holds the line pretty good. But it's just disappointing when a lot of them, because it's very important that that bridge is left open to me. Otherwise, both sides can be totally psyoped against each other, and there's no hope for like a little bit of reasonable dialogue. That's all I personally would want. Is like, you know, the nationalists in the UK not to be turned into anti or like pro-Zionist stooges. But in order for that not to happen, you would need someone from the Muslim side being reasonable as well, right? I think I've lost you there.
I'm back in. You got me. Okay. Yeah, I dropped out and like you just cut off, so I changed my internet again, and obviously I've just come back in, so I've missed some of that. Yeah, I heard you mention Syrian girl. The thing with her, I will say, is to the best of my knowledge, and I may be wrong on this, I've not heard her like counter signal white advocacy.
Oh no,
you know, I wouldn't have imagined. Sorry. Yeah.
No, you dropped out. So I'll just reiterate it. What I was saying is, I was saying precisely that I was saying she's a perfect example of someone not doing that, someone being involved in that sort of middle space, like the counter Zionist narrative from both sides, respecting the European point of view on that, but also having a sort of Middle Eastern anti-Zionist view, and you know, which is like, yeah, look, everybody can agree on that. You know, name your Tristan Tates and all this, you know, all these figures out there that are kind of bridging that gap, Fuentes and all the others. It's like that space is, there's a lot to be said for that. There's that's a real, it is getting out there, and it is sort of in the culture, the TikTok culture and all that. It's good, but it's very weird to see people who are sort of signed up members of that world just totally fucking it up, basically. And Galloway was a huge example of that, because he's not quite in that. He's not as online as he's older, but it's just sad, because it's like, what happened to your stuff about like disaffected white working class? Like what? Like how does he not see that? Hey, the Muslims who you're like, you know, I think his wife might be Muslim. Like he's in that world, and of course he spent his life being a Palestine advocate, and he's all about the Arab nationalism. and all that. But it's like, how can you forget the basic idea? You know that at the mosque, these people are totally linked in with all this social fabric. You know that they're in a country that they were transplanted into, much like Israelis were, or Jews were into Palestine in the early 20th century. You know all that's true. So like, how can you just forget about white people, like dehumanize them when it counts? Like not say, hey, we don't want mosques getting targeted, but at the same time, there's a basis to this, you know? It's just sad. And what it does is it creates, it's like, if I were like the British state, the social planners, I would be rubbing my hands, so to speak, right? But I would. because it's perfect. You're like, great. What we want is the sort of the narrative structure of our opponents to sort of fall apart. This so become bifurcated. I want them to engage in their own bifurcation, and that's what they kind of do there.
Galloway's a strange one. He's quite happy to ally with people who are genuinely really harmful to white working class people, especially just white people generally. He's quite happy to ally with them and use them for votes and for his own narcissism. So while he's right sometimes and while he can kind of be an amusing character, I cannot give him the thumbs up. It's frustrating. He's a funny one, Galloway, because as I said, he's always, he courted the votes of Bangladeshis because of opposition to the Iraq war in the 2005 general election for the Respect Party, and then he got elected in Bradford West, and he's stood against kind of Muslim candidates in elections before and kind of tried to cast them as being almost like a Muslim equivalent of Uncle Tom's and whatever, and being too pro-America and too milquetoast in their criticism of Israel. And there's been cases of him going into, maybe they're kind of a typical Labour candidate, and it's alleged that Galloway's a Muslim. He doesn't drink. He's a Catholic by kind of upbringing and that, but he kind of he's a funny one because he speaks like he's like a buffer in video. Have you never noticed the patterns of his speech? It's almost like a video that's kind of loading in a very stop-start way, because he'll kind of go like, "Who opposed the invasion of Iraq? Who here is the true Muslim?" It's like weird sort of stops and starts, and it's like a buffer in video, But
I actually wish I could speak like that. I wish I could do that actually to slow it down. I think it's cool, because you're holding court. That's what he's usually doing.
It's true. I mean, I speak at sort of 500 miles an hour, but I've at times learned to slow it down a bit, because I think my thing was I used to be on a podcast with two of the blokes, and one in particular was big fan of big on interrupting. So you always wanted to rush to get your point out before you got cut across and then get back in again. Whereas when you're on your own, no one's going to interrupt you. You can take as long as you want, and it's good for you. But you are right on that, on kind of being able to just hold court a little bit. He's a good speaker in that regard, Galloway. I'll give him that. But I mean, he's funny. That I found out recently that trilby or that fedora, I don't know which it is. That hat that he always wears, he wears that because some mad convert to Judaism beat him up for being an anti-Semite in the street once. Some slightly mad bloke, and I think he went to jail for it. Yeah. I didn't know that until recently, but there you are. Yeah.
He's an interesting figure for sure. It's just disappointing. That's where like when a thing like this happens, I don't go to. It's almost like, in a way, some of the people I might like to agree with, I don't go to see what they're saying because I know what they're saying. I go to someone like Galloway, these sort of fault lines people, and I want to see what they're saying, because that's they represent a sort of like a fault line there somewhere. And I don't know. Anyway, I don't want to go on about that. Like I think he's quite impressive and the rest of it, but it's just a pity, because it's places like that is where the conversation is going to be made sensible potentially, or it just turns into this bifurcated. I know it's naturally bifurcated because of nature and reality, but there would be potential for none of us want to be, instrumentalized here. Let's talk reasonably. Let's not just leave it to Anjem Chowdhury and Tommy Robinson, that kind of way. How do we not have it be that? Well, you can't do that if on one end you're like saying, "Hey, I'm the native British ethno-cultural nationalist, whatever you call it, nationalist, right? I'm that guy, and here's me being reasonable to the other side. Now, where's your guy?" It's very important for that other guy to exist. Who am I talking to? Because otherwise it's just left to Tommy Dano. So I just think that's an important point. Who's Mark Collett meant to talk to? Yeah. Who's he meant to talk to? I don't know, Tommy, whatever the other guy. It's
Tommy Robinson.
Tommy Robinson, yeah. It's just a pity, because I really hate to see that sort of they're here with their like the Muslims are going to be looking for the jizya. Have you ever heard of that? It sounds kind of wrong to talk about that.
Tacky. Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah. Like, I mean, the classic with Tommy Robinson is like, produces an irate response video after October the 7th, and it's kind of like, responding to kind of like white nationalists who are looking at it saying, well, Israel's kind of provoked some of this or whatever you might say, allegedly, but like, sort of his response would be like, let me tell you about Islam. Yeah. Sniffing. Don't know why that would be the case. It's like 2009, we took the English Defence League to Birmingham. Yeah. And a local Pakistani community came out with flags of Al Qaeda and ISIS. Yeah. That is Islam. Yeah, that's very much the Tommy Robinson thing, angry response videos while sniffing profusely.
Yeah, it's always Islam.
That is Islam in Birmingham.
Yeah, and just like the whole thing about it's the ideology and the way that it's focusing too much on like Islam, like it's an obsession with the religion itself. This is all about page 52.5 of the Quran, but it's really not like that.
Yeah, Surah 8, Ayah 12. Yeah.
Come on, and the trouble is that when they go down that road, of course, it's about what's the word? Doubling down on liberalism, right? So you're doubling down on liberalism, and you're doubling down on multiculturalism too. You're saying, oh no, it's like, so it's one thing if they took standard nationalism and then layered it on with this over the top, let's call it Islam focus, but it's like, no, the Islam focus is actually a replacement for the real discussion. It reinforces think of a crazed far left university student. It basically takes what would be called Islamophobia and uses that as a replacement for, basically a way to actually revert back to like a university left-wing fanatics view on identity and multiculturalism. Because that's what you hear from the likes of Robinson.
I'll make 2 points on that. I mean, I will actually say, first of all, I do think it remains a good thing to do to ask white liberals who want to defend multiculturalism and defend the levels of immigration, particularly where it pertains to Muslims. Ask them, okay, so what do you as a white liberal who's like trans rights, gay marriage, and all this, that, the other, and feminism, you love all that. What specifically do you like about Islam and Muslims?
Yeah.
I think that's still a great question to ask, because that's Saul Alinsky rules for radicals: hold the enemy to their own standards. First of all, But I would also say,
you could also just can I just say one just on that line? It's like you could just say, what's your favorite thing about Roma Gypsies?
Yeah. Well, my favorite question to ask anyone who wants to kind of defend any of this, because it encapsulates the whole thing, is name one thing non-whites can do that we cannot do ourselves and that we cannot survive or thrive without, which justifies the presence of millions of them in our countries. Because you can't, you're going to because you can survive and thrive without kebabs.
They would say you can't. Healthcare, food, everything. Like the idea is that actually
trust me,
nothing.
Yeah, but they're wrong, because trust me, having asked them thousands of times, when they say, "Oh, our NHS," if it's in Britain, will you point out that, well, yeah, okay, but the population of Britain that isn't white is about the same as the percentage of NHS staff that isn't white. And if you go and look at malpractice tribunals, foreign doctors are about 10 times more likely to be involved in malpractice tribunals than white ones. They'll talk about food, and you say, yeah, I forgot how we weren't starving to death before we had Balti. I forgot how we were starving to death before we had Balti houses. There's never anything other than that, and they can't name any specific thing, any one thing that they can do that we can't do ourselves, that we can't survive or thrive without. Because what you're then getting to by making them realize they can't answer that question is, none of this is being done in our interests. But anyway, I digress. One thing I was going to say is...
Oh, go on.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, you go.
Well, no, it's just to stay on the thing of on the thing of Islam as a doctrine, and as cringe as all the counter jihad stuff is, they're looking for the jizya and all that. I do think that the doctrine of Islam is a part of the problem when it comes to the Muslim diaspora. It's not just race, as people think, because there are some exceptions to this on the grounds of sect and on the grounds of the type of immigrant they may have been. Like, I don't know, people leaving Iran after the Iranian Revolution that were kind of they were Shia and they were quite secular and they were middle class, and there were people that left because they were in the good graces of the previous regime and they weren't in the good graces of the Islamic regime, and so on and so forth. But generally speaking, you could be talking about Algerians in France, you could be talking about Moroccans in the Netherlands and Belgium, you could be talking about Turks in Germany, Somalis in Sweden, Arabs in Denmark, Pakistanis in Britain, Bangladeshis in Britain. the kind of the social and the law and order problems and the cultural problems are all remarkably similar. One thing that is, prevalent among a lot of those kind of diaspora groups is they do have high rates of consanguinity, which is to say, like, cousin marriage and stuff like that, which I don't think is a great thing. None more so, as I said earlier on, than like Mirpuris from Pakistan. But I think the doctrine plays a part in this because, whatever you want to say about it, and I'm not saying this to defend liberal principles, but Islam, unlike, say, Hinduism, unlike Sikhism, it is an expansionist, proselytizing religion. It is supremacist. It does have a very, very kind of aggressive in-group, out-group distinction. I mean, this is embodied really well by the fact that, and there's a lot of things in certain regard. I mean, I'm saying this as a teetotal bloke that doesn't gamble with a big beard, that doesn't eat bacon. So I'd be all right under the caliphate more so than most white people would. I've had Salam Alaikum said to me in the street a couple of times, but anyway, I digress. It is embodied by the fact that, like, I'm pretty sure anyone can go and visit the Vatican. And certainly you can go and eat for free in the temporal seat of the Sikh religion in Amritsar. Anyone can eat for free there. All you got to do, cover your head, take your shoes off, and don't be drunk or stoned or whatever. A non-Muslim can't enter Mecca or Medina, the two holiest cities in Islam. It has got a very aggressive in-group, out-group distinction. And the tensions that arise, regardless of whether it's, again, Algerians in France or it's Turks in Germany or it's Pakistanis in Britain, they're very similar everywhere. On a large scale, speaking of the collectives, it is what it is. Now, that's not me saying, oh, aren't Indians great? Let's have a country full of Hindus and Sikhs. They've got their own problems, but there wasn't a Sikh, Rotherham, or a Hindu, Newcastle, or whatever else. Go and talk to Canadians or Australians about Indian immigrants. They will be deeply unflattering about them, but it's not. It's not like it's not the Paris atrocity. It's not Rotherham. It's not Telford. It's not Newcastle. And it wasn't mobs of Hindus or Sikhs out with weapons in the street at the last weekend, and early this week in Britain. And the religion's a part of that. It's not just race. I think people do have to remember that. But anyway,
it's got like mafia kind of qualities to it. Sort of the tight knit structural thing. And like you're in or you're out, very sort of solid on that. That's one aspect too. Like, it is very much in or out, really. Unlike I don't know, like, you could be, well, I suppose you could be a liberal Muslim, like sort of secular, but it'd be far more easy for a Tamil Indian extraction person to just be like integrated, sort of like a normie. Whereas for your average like Muslim connected person, they sort of have to be Muslim. But I don't know. I do think, of course, that's an issue, but it's just like the way, like in Dublin at the moment, there's a lot of Indians buying up property and sort of like, it's the classic thing of they're tribally connected too, so they hire each other a lot. They are, or whatever.
Yeah, they are. They're very rapacious and nepotistic. Absolutely, yeah. No, they absolutely are very rapacious and nepotistic, and they're prone to their own arrogances and snobberies and grudges against white people. No mistake about it at all. Yeah, absolutely.
So it's that's the thing, is that, and similar things could be said for Chinese and the rest of it. But it's like, that's the nature of immigrant groups. It's kind of like, even like there's a point at which like Irish people in Australia will kind of mob up with each other. And these things happen. Obviously, it's a hugely different scale, but I'm just saying, like, even at a mild kind of level, that's just a phenomenon that happens, and Islam has got its particularities. Like, it's this kind of aggressive expansionist thing, and it's connected to all this Middle East stuff too. It's crazy having this like global conflict scenario brought into your own borders. Like, the invade and invite thing is pretty mad, but like. Like, it's like whatever about Indians, like the US didn't just like the US and Britain didn't invade India, so that would kind of heighten the tensions with your Indian population, let's say, had that been the case. But you might have like splinter separatist groups, terrorist groups, even stuff like that going on too. But so I'm not defending anything in particular. I just I think it would be good if a dialogue could happen between elements of what you would call the left, elements of what you would call the Muslim community or a migrant community, and nationalists. Like, just, because a complete radio silence between the two is where the state just, like I say, instrumentalizes both sides for their own agenda, and it sort of ends up literally steering the conversation. So again, like, instead of it being a conversation about migration, about ethnic white English rights and the rest of it, and about repatriation, about stopping the immigration. It's just an organic, real conversation. It becomes about how Islam is not gay enough, or about, these Palestinians, are such a problem. Let's go, like, support Israel's war in Gaza. And all. It's like that all that stuff can seep in through the gap in communication and the gap in mutual understanding. I sound like some sort of peacemaker here, but it's or negotiator, but it's like that does matter, and their key figures are important for that to set up, because there's nothing worse that the British state would not like if there were conversations happening between all relevant parties, even if there were debates, arguments, big disagreements, but just more conversation. I don't think they would like that at all.
I mean, it's one thing. That's
why patriotic alternative are banned, right? That's one of the big reasons, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things, like a lot of us, I think, within nationalist circles in this country, were a little bit worried. In fact, we were worried about it before this kind of unrest really kicked off. Was this being utilized to, again, like kind of animate the kind of the working class in England or in Britain with the clash of civilizations? It's the Muslims. Now, okay, yeah, the presence of a load of Muslims in your country and all the things that result from that is a big part of the problem, but it's not the root of the problem. But the people behind the root of the problem using that to, like, now we've got to go and sort of do a load of wars. So, join up to fight, join up to fight for British values against radical Islam, because we're fine with moderate Muslims, but, join up. And we wary of it being weaponized in that way, particularly if it was like a little bit of a, okay, we hear you sort of thing to working class white people. I say working class because, and that's not really fair, because I suppose there are plenty of people that would be in the bracket of middle class that they're not sort of regime loyalists, liberals, but the thing I was going to say is just that, like, Mike Enoch actually had a good take on this, Mike Painovich, which was to say that there was an incident of unrest in Rotherham. You've got one of these hotels housing these foreign men in Rotherham, and like they committed arson against it. Now, someone was live streaming this, and whoever was live streaming it was kind of said, "Look, I've got no problem with any color, no problem with any race, religion, but there's too much immigration or whatever else." And, Mike Painovich had said they're kind of saying these things because they know it's what they're meant to say, but it's the actions that speak louder. And they're not just treating it as a thing that is about Muslims. When, again, remember, this, this was a Rwandan, but there was some kind of form of misinformation, whether it was the state or whether it was someone else, to give people that impression early on. So it's a bit of a mad situation. You talked about it earlier on, the layers of it. It gets quite complicated and quite messy. But I think that was a good point, nevertheless, that this, okay, yeah, it was Muslims, but it's also about immigration. But we were wary of that thing of trying to use it to divert people into, like, how can we turn this into more support for Israel and for Israeli foreign policy objectives and Zionist geopolitics and stuff like that. But I don't know whether the fact that the government have just come, clamping down very, very hard on white dissent makes you think, okay, well, they're not too worried about getting these people into the armed forces, or the real black pill would be they think they're stupid enough and have short enough memories that they'll still send their sons to sign up even when they've been sent to jail for, like, telling a copper to, shove it up his arse or something. So I don't know.
Yeah, sorry, I muted myself again. So that's interesting. It's like, the idea that it's some big huge psyop, I suppose, wouldn't make sense, because if you are grooming your native population to be activated against Islam and Muslims, and basically, why would you be, like, thoroughly alienating them by mass arrests and all that? So, perhaps maybe it is just more what it looks like, which is a sort of a immigration out of control for various ethnic interests who promoted it, but also business interests and American hegemony and all that stuff, right? They've kind of done it, like,
and above all else, a panicked attempt in terms of responding to what happened. Sorry.
But, like,
No, I was going to say, like, a panicked attempt to restore order, just like by any means, we need to restore order quickly. Yeah, sorry.
That's kind of it, yeah. So, like, basically, like, the replacement project happened because of a confluence of various interests. But, like, I'm not saying it's not organized, but what I mean is it that's a different story. It happened. It occurred over the years or decades, and now it is what it is. And they, from a just state, governing the society capacity, they look at this going on, and they know that they. My view was like, people talk about echoing. By the way, I don't know. I think it's maybe if I don't mute my mic, I'll try to do that when you're talking. But I don't know. You do the same as well, I suppose, perhaps. So I was thinking about, like, let's say I'm the British state, like the people who just control the country. They don't like set up multi-decade plans to replace or whatever, but they are responsible for the place being relatively stable, you know. And they could be looking at Ireland, which can sort of handle what's been going on in Ireland. Ireland can handle the civil unrest. The cops come in and bash it up a little bit, and they can just let it kind of play out for now, because we don't have huge enclaves of militant Muslims and migrants and stuff like that yet. Like, they're there, but they're diffuse. They're not all mobbed up with each other. We don't have that thing. The Irish are more mobbed up than anyone really here still, you know what I mean, so far, in terms of numbers and in terms of just connection to each other and stuff like that. Whereas over there, or over here with you, it's like, you know, I wonder where assuming it's not all a complete 5-dimensional psyop, right? That they were looking at Ireland very close by neighbor, literally bordering, let's say, depending on who you ask. And, you know, they think that's all well and good for Ireland. Like, the regime are being put under pressure. But if that spreads over here, we can't handle that. Like, we just cannot. Like, we cannot have that ongoing. With the amount of Muslims in these cities and migrants, and how radicalized they are, multi-generational, huge mosques, and the whole history there, right, that they have now, and the numbers. They think if that comes over here, if the English start acting up like that, and then there's counter responses, we are looking at, if we sort of game theory war game this, we're looking at a rapid situation that starts with an incident, a flare up, a reaction, a counter reaction, and so on. That could escalate into a functional civil war within days, weeks. And and they would just say, basically, that just can't happen. So when this Irish thing, the contagions, comes over here, and when a couple of little girls end up dead or whatever, sadly, and the whole thing plays out, we're going to have to, basically, the game plan is we're going to have to absolutely crack down hardcore on the whites, because to do that, if we crack down on the Muslims or the foreigners, like you said, you start a fight with one of them, or one of them fights you, 25 of their cousins are out straight away. And they just look at it from a purely pragmatic point of view. The whites aren't going to do that. We have them all fucked up already, basically. Whereas the Muslims, no matter what we do, even if we psyop them to death, we pull all the stops out, we arrest them, certain ones, we target ones for surgical arrest, we punish them on social media, we do the whole playbook. The Muslims, they're still going to come out with bats and machetes and mob up together and communicate through the mosque. So let's just go hardcore on the whites, and that's how we are going to maintain basic functional state order. It's the only thing we can do.
Well, I mean, your description there of how quickly this stuff can get out of hand is there was an interesting video came out from Middlesbrough when there was unrest last Sunday. Now, I don't know how long this went on for. I don't know who they were letting through and who they weren't. But the word was that in this video, it was white people stopping traffic and just checking the race of the occupant and maybe having a word with them. And if they were, you know, I don't know whether that was like, yeah, you're white, you can come through. Anyone else? No, you're not coming into this area. I don't know how long it went on. I don't know I don't know whether it was like a case of like, okay, yeah, you look Muslim, you're not coming through, but, you know, yeah, you can come on through, Mr. Akinfenwa from, you know, Lagos or whatever, because it's all about the Muslims. But you've got to have some kind of sense of a group consciousness to even think in those terms in the first place. And that is kind of civil war stuff, like checkpoints on the road, enclaves. And the thing with this is like it's the perception of being able to maintain order that is the important thing, because the actual ability to maintain order, if it's kicking off in multiple cities, can be stretched pretty quickly. And it's like, oh, okay, we'll send the army in. Yeah, the army may not be better at maintaining order that much better at maintaining order than the police, other than doing like the thing the army can do that the police basically can't, which is like start shooting people. That's a hell of a dangerous Rubicon to be crossing. And they wouldn't have wanted it to get to that stage. So it's like, yeah, let's assert the appearance of control, and we'll do it through like, yeah, your post hoc sentencing and your psyop, like, oh, we came out and we faced down the far right. The end. We all lived happily ever after, hating the non-compliant white people, and now they're all going to jail, and we'll throw the odd Muslim in jail as well to kind of have a retort to the two-tier accusations, and we've got order again. Because obviously, as you say, as I said, rather. And I saw people speculating about this, people saying, oh, you know, I was in the police, or I know someone who was kind of in the police, or talking about resources. It's like, there's a lot of riot, you know, there's a lot of resources for policing unrest in London, because if people have got a political point to make, it's protesting against the Iraq war, or it's protesting to free Tommy Robinson, or it's, you know, just, well, or it's whatever it is, it's against the, you know, the Israelis killing Palestinians. They go to London and they have a big event. And maybe it kicks off with the police a bit. So they've got, you know, the riot police, and they've got the equipment, and they've got the surveillance technology, and they've got that in more abundance in London than they maybe have in, you know, if it boots off in Hartlepool, it's a bit of a different story. And I think one thing that will arise, and I said this early on from seeing this unrest break out, is they'll be stocking up massively. And they've said this, you know, on the kind of the technological means and the resources to police disorder, because if demographics get worse, there's only going to be more incidents of like some mad African loner going and killing people, or a Muslim going on a stabbing spree or whatever, and inflaming the native population. So the sentencing's one thing, but they'll need those resources. But as you say, it's one of these things where they probably had moments of real panic during that, of like, well, we don't know where this is going to go. And, you know, if it spreads on enough of a scale, we have got no hope of maintaining order. And again, as I said, like, people started saying, oh, is this going to lead to the army being sent in? You know, if you're sending the army into police riots, you're doing it for numbers, yes, but you're perhaps also doing it because they're going to be a bit better practiced and being more heavy-handed. But, you know, the idea of having the army out on the streets, it's not a great look, and it's a definite before and after. So, yeah, there was maybe an element with this of it just being a panicked response of, like you said, what's the easiest way to deal with this? And it's like, there was a Blair Cottrell post last week saying Dorman are trying to intervene in a fight in a nightclub. It's the weakest party they'll try and get out of there, because that's going to be easier to deal with than the stronger party. And sadly, you know,
or with the I've seen funny memes. You know, you might have seen these ones where it's like you see pictures of like the Avengers running sort of together. Or something like that, and it's like the meme is like the teacher on the way to protect the bully when the person who's being bullied snaps and hits them, you know, that kind of way. It's something we all recognize in school, where like there was the teacher had a couple of bullies who were sort of, they would like tut at them, you know, oh, don't be such a bully, but they enjoyed the sort of sense of order that it created throughout the class. And if at some point the person who was being bullied, or just a quiet person in the middle, decide like who was getting punched and kicked and abused and mocked by some kind of prick, who the teacher was just kind of letting it sort of happen. But if that person smacked back, the teacher would freak out. And that was a thing that you would see, you know, the teacher would freak out that, oh, there's chaos here now, because the person who I've sort of allowed to be the alpha has been struck down. And I can't maintain order when it goes like that. I can't have civil war in my classroom. You know what I mean? I have to have my appointed invigilator. But yeah, that's true. And like, I don't want to get into like fan fiction here is kind of Camp of the Saints stuff or whatever necessarily. But you know, you can like, I can imagine all sorts, like tit for tat going back and forth within cities. At even in London, like let's say if London got out of control, like it could get to a point where they talk about pogroms and the far right going around targeting people. Realistically, what would happen is there could be the most liberal white person ever anywhere near some large migrant Muslim area, and you can imagine them being attacked just purely based on their race, right? And that could be happening en masse, and you could have even checkpoints going into those communities, informal ones, South African style. Both directions. And then all this kind of like you like all this stuff could, of course, we condemn all, we only support legal, peaceful political activity, but it's just the fact that like this kind of stuff could spiral. And I just wonder even about the army, like the like once you have military on the streets, it's a whole other ball game. Like I don't know, you're right there. I don't know if there's a whole lot
you've added an entirely different state of being. No, that's it. And I said another point I made on this was go on.
Oh no, you go ahead.
What were you going to say? Okay, yeah. Well, just one of the points I made after we'd seen like mobs of basically Muslim paramilitaries almost last Saturday in places like Stoke was if you know, let's say the process by which tens of millions of foreigners were brought into Britain was some sort of like honest mistake. They thought, yeah, it's going to be great. We'll have cheaper labor. We'll have like more diverse food. Everyone will get on and form a new culture, and it's going to be brilliant, and no bad things will happen. If that were just some catastrophic mistake, when you had mobs of foreigners brandishing weapons going and looking for white people to attack, a state who just made an honest mistake in that regard, they'd be like, oh, crikey, right, we're going to have to deal with this quickly. Let's send the army in. But we all knew that if that had carried on long enough and got bad enough that it was like, right, well, we didn't want to do it, but we're going to have to send the army. And the army would have been being sent in to brutalize white people. Everyone knows that. Now, how well that would have gone if it had ever happened, how well it'll go if it happens in the future, it remains to be seen. It will depend on the degree. You might depend to a degree on the demographics of the army at that time, because generally speaking, these are people that will follow orders. But I don't know. Like, yeah, you'd have large numbers of them who would just follow the orders. They could be manipulated enough that they would be thinking they were doing the right thing by following the orders to kind of like, you know, visit violence upon white protesters. But if you had a small element that don't, that's something that get very, very messy, very messy. You know, if you end up with you could end up with a military that factionalizes, then that's civil war. Because the thing with the civil war is like, civil war between, you know, one group that have got machetes and samurai swords and petrol bombs, and another group that have got that, and they can maybe smuggle the odd rifle in and improvise explosive devices. Okay, that's one thing. That's horrific. But if you then end up like you have a split in your military or something, there you go. I mean,
you could have a lot of stuff could, of course, we, you know, again, we condemn everything and support peaceful political activity, but like you could have, like, were a thing to escalate enough, you could have rural you could have stuff like road blockades and port blockades. You could have all sorts of things, random things just happening from God knows who, but just like this sort of breakdown in everything. And I think the line between like, okay, it's kind of kicking off here and there, and the police are coming in with, you know, water cannons, and it's back and forth, and the media are putting this polish on it to get it back into play and convict a few people. The line between that and where you sort of move into Bosnian territory is very fine, and there's a lot of state control is required at this point. It's going to be the same across the West, very much in England now, I would say. It requires a very, very heavy state hand, and that hand will be coming down entirely on the British white native population, because they are the vulnerable, the weak party, basically. I think that's kind of the thing. But then the world is watching as well, so I don't know. Maybe we'll wrap it up there. I don't know. Do you have any final thoughts on just overall?
No, I think I've kind of said everything I would have wanted to say about it.
Okay, fair enough. I hope I didn't ramble too much. You know, I like to listen to people, but then I'm like you as well. I think we both like talking, right?
Yeah. That's how we got 3.5 hours. Yeah.
Oh man. Okay. I shouldn't have let that happen. I was in my mind I was going to be an hour maximum, but anyways, I'll just quickly go through some super chats if you don't mind, and I'll let you go.
Yeah.
So, Undisclosed JS gives 853, no comment, thank you very much. Sheepdog 2 asks, why is it happening, all this? I have yet to hear. It's a big one, isn't it? Why is it happening? I think we've sort of just spent 3.5 hours just kind of talking about that. So I you know, it's happening for all the reasons we've just been talking about. I think fair enough. Thank you, of course. Armchair Limerick Nationalist 10, thank you very much. It says, sound for the chat, lads. Ireland will get exactly what is imposed on England, so solidarity is needed. We must be allies to fight against all of this tyranny. Yeah, I just think, just for what interest it is to the audience, and maybe to you, Tollah, as well, is that I've often thought Ireland's we can be as plucky as we like, but we're not going to do anything without like changes in America, let's say. Now, I don't know how to, I can't really relate with the American scene too much. It's a little bit too far, too foreign for me. But England is sort of like a halfway house. England is still a geopolitical node, it's like powerful, right? Sort of financially, economically, militarily, it's like a little sister or whatever of the US regime, and so like it's part of the Western American war machine and all that. So in a way that we're not. So to me, I'm like, I want to see. England needs to change. Something needs to happen in England, because as far as I'm concerned, if we change things over here and England was still the way it is, then we're getting missiles rained down on us from the RAF or whatever it is, right? You know, if they are still stuck in that mindset. The same goes for continental Europe, but like, I mean, Britain is key for us personally here anyway. So for me, I'm not just watching as a sort of a detached spectator at all. Like it is of crucial importance in Ireland. For Ireland to have independence, English people must have their own independence in a way. It's extremely important. Otherwise, we're all screwed basically. So anyway, that's just, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, the interplay there.
No, other than to say that I agree with what you're saying about really changing America would be the most impactful, because if you have one sort of European country that absolutely kind of goes rogue, where something happens, there's a rupture. I mean, France, I've always thought France is quite a likely place. I won't go on too long about this, but
yeah,
if you had some kind of unrest in France where things broke down and a new power took a new sort of regime, sorry, like not regime, we tend to use regime for the transnational thing, but like there was a new political order within France, and they sort of said, right, we're starting mass deportations, we're doing this, we're going to govern in the interest of the French, we're anti-globalism, we're anti-NATO. Yeah, very quickly the war drums would be being beaten, and they'd be trying to manufacture consent for saying, this guy in France, he's a threat to the liberal order and democracy and freedom, and he's committing human rights atrocities, and he's doing that. And it'd be like, yeah, it sounds mad to think of it in like a kind of a major Western European country, but they'd want to move quickly toward like what they did with the Serbs.
Yeah, or Assad.
They'd have to do it carefully,
like
but they'd want to, yeah, exactly, yeah. Axis of evil, yeah. Now add this French guy, this former general or whatever, you know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And but like one of, I think, America's favorite client state in the West, full stop, is Britain, is London. Like so it's extremely revolutionary for that things to be falling apart there. It's the next, it's the first rung down from the US, you know what I mean, in the broader sense of things. It's basically a large aircraft carrier, much like Ireland is too, like a smaller one. So next up, Finolo Mercu 5, thank you very much, says stay united as Irish, English, Scottish and Welsh. Yeah, that's a whole conversation in Ireland, the north thing and stuff. I don't even want to get into that, but as a general, it's sort of one of those complex things. But of course, I would extend that then to French and everybody else too. You know, I'm a big tent type of person. I even like talking to, like, I'll talk to like Pakistanis about Khan being like cooed and how that's wrong, and they're like, they love hearing that, you know. And so not to sound like a total globalist kumbaya person, but I would extend that endlessly to a point. But as these islands and stuff, I mean, there's so much in common, like compared to even continental Europeans, you know. It's complicated because there's a lot of Irish people are so wary of anything to do with England because of the amount of the amount of state subversion that is higher over there, and people are just wary of it. That like. So there's this kind of spook thing goes on there, but so it's complicated for so many reasons, but totally for like both geostrategic and for personal reasons. I love there's a lot of you know, the Anglophobic thing, like in Ireland. I have a big curiosity. I would love to drive around England for weeks and just see the place and get to know it a little bit. I really would.
But found your insights when you going back about 4 years. I found your insights of your trip to London very interesting.
Yeah. What a shithole. Like maybe not all of it, but the central, like honestly, bad. But I would love to drive. I would love to go to like little, like pokey little festivals in the countryside. full of English people, and just
I've
would marvel.
I've
I
got
would
some.
marvel at that.
I've got somewhat of a novel take actually on the kind of the globalization and the colonization of England, well, of Britain, which is to say that, you know, notwithstanding all the displaced and ethnically cleansed Londoners, it bothers me more to see the effects of globalization and immigration in, say, Birmingham or some mill town in Yorkshire than it does in London, because London's got the cachet of being a global city, and I'm not necessarily against global cities existing in some form. Not where it's like the natives are a minority and they've got no protections and they have no elevated status and citizen status over the non-citizen foreigners that is there for some economic reason. But when you've got Birmingham and it's just a city and it's just colonized by Pakistanis, or Bradford and it's colonized by Pakistanis, and so on and so forth, that bothers me more, because those are places that in a lot of cases are genuinely dingy and dreary and shit and haven't got a lot going for them, whereas London has still got other things going for it, you know. So yeah.
I like, even this might sound very strange at this late hour, but you know, growing up, like we had the Premier League sticker book, you know, those with the shiny stickers and stuff, right?
Yeah, Merlin Premier League and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, we had
I've
those.
I've been on Liverpool podcast with Irish people before.
Oh, cool.
I went to Ireland to be on a Liverpool podcast once. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that came back to haunt you, I think, a little bit, right? Perhaps.
It wasn't the day trippers, lads. It was Anfield Index. Okay. That was a different one, but yeah, the voice recognition software in the Czech Republic. Yeah.
Damn. Yeah. But yeah, like you know, but you know, you would have like Newcastle, the emblems of the different cities, and it just seemed kind of exotic to me. I'd never been there. I you know, you've like soap operas and TV and stuff. We'd watch that, and just the idea of like seeing like 90s sort of Alan Shearer at Newcastle. I think he was Newcastle. That sort of,
yeah, he was.
I had in my mind's eye this vision of like, and you know, a kid's like sort of remedial or whatever the word is view of it, but I had a romantic view of like Northern England. Maybe remedial means like special needs, I'm not sure, but I was a young kid, you know. But just this you know, the idea of like an old sort of mill town or Northern English, that real vibe, but then there's so many different, but the Yorkshire Dales, and if that's even a place, it is, isn't it? All these different micro regions with their people, and or like if you look at a footage of like the Darkness, they were like a really tatty, silly kind of band, right? You remember them? But if you see like the Darkness playing some festival 20 plus years ago, and the crowd looks so innocent and English, you know, and you know, out having a nice day out or whatever. Pardon?
The Darkness, they were from Lowestoft in Suffolk. I believe in the yeah, I can sing that on karaoke.
Fair play. Like the you know, like, you know, the James May type, you know, the fiddling engineer type and all that. Like I would love to like maybe I'm caricaturing things, but it's just like I would like to have a chance to go see all that, and I feel like it's increasingly at a point where I won't be able to do that at all. Really, it's hard to find. So that, anyway, look, that was the super chat. But next one here is Ed the Statesman, no comment, gives 10. Thank you very much. So that's those for the night. Okay, thank you for giving me 3 hours 40 minutes of your time, Tollah. Appreciate it.
No, pleasure, mate. I've enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
All right, I'll let you go. And thanks to everybody for joining us tonight. Take it easy, and we'll see you next time. Iwa.
Cheers. Good night, everyone.